Stop. Friendly fire. Chapter 20 to 21. Chapter 20. Forest of the Dryads. This was a world where skeletons and golems walked the earth and where rats could speak. Because the world was such, Shin Woo wasn't surprised in the least at the thought of trees spewing acid poison. The energy coming from the forest is no joke. Guess not. What? But when they arrived at the forest, which had cut Vita's troops in half and caused him to retreat, Shin Woo had to correct his past judgment. The forest wasn't just filled to the brim with trees. No, to be more exact, there was something else aside from the trees. Maybe Arian would have known. That girl. Wait, why are you talking about an elf? Because it's a forest? It just feels like an elf would be more accustomed to dealing with things like that. Shin Woo looked at the vast forest before them, and shrugged his shoulders, observing the area spewing out rotten and withered mana. The undead, who didn't even possess clear egos, might have seen it as the trees attacking all of a sudden, but to Shin Woo, I see something stuck to the trees. They might be spirits. Now that you mention it, it definitely seems like. It possessed an extremely pale complexion, and looked like an expressionless old lady. The one stuck to the tree didn't seem to be in healthy condition. LV5 Corrupted Dryad, Elite. LV5 Acid Great Tree. As I thought. Shin Woo, who could ascertain their identities, was naturally given information pertaining to them as well. Dryads, or spirits who live in the trees. If dryads were to become undead, that's exactly what he thought they'd look like. Did they become like that because the dryads latched onto the trees, which should have withered and died, and supplied them with mana? If that's the case, that's kind of sad. As a result of their efforts to save the trees, the dryads and the trees both became ghastly. Though Jin sported a bitter expression, Shin Woo patted his back and comforted him. But because of that, we can kill both the dryads and the trees. That's all karma. There were a ridiculous amount of trees within the forest, whereas there weren't that many corrupted dryads managing the trees. That meant that the dryads were skilled enough to transform all the trees in the forest into level 5 monsters, despite being low in number. If they're that skilled, then we'll get a better reward to compensate. Plus, they seem like a rare species. Your cruel way of thinking has made my budding tears wither and die. Good. Let's cry after we send them all off. Seriously, what color is your blood? 1. Shin Woo activated the assimilation skill prior to entering the forest, and shared his acid resistance to the best of his ability, like what he'd done when he had first fought Kracia. Back then, he'd only had a connection with Jin through horseback riding, but now that his assimilation skill had developed significantly, he was able to completely share his level 9 low-rank acid resistance with Jin. The effectiveness of your own acid resistance should go up as it levels. You're not planning on quickly breaking through, right? Yeah. I'm going to cut them down one by one. Just think of the acid as a mist sauna. There probably weren't a lot of people who could call immersing their body into acid the same as a mist sauna. Jin sighed and took a step forward towards the forest. Shin Woo performed a final inspection of his gear before they entered the forest. He obviously wore the acid bone full armor, as there really wasn't any other option. This full armor, which covered his entire body, increased the effectiveness of his acid-type abilities by 40%, so it would naturally increase the effectiveness of his acid resistance. Therefore, he could say that he was all set. And my weapon will be the Melting Bone Double Axe. The Melting Bone Double Axe likewise had an option that increased the effectiveness of his acid-type abilities by 20%. Even though Shin Woo knew that the acid mist within this forest was more powerful than the acid ghouls, the reason he entered without any hesitation was because this was a place where he would be able to improve his acid resistance. If I use some other tricks, I can reduce the acid damage even further, but I'll make that call after seeing their acid attacks. Yeah, you're so amazing. They weren't low-leveled enemies, and each and every tree was level 5. Yet Shin Woo didn't think of them as anything more than a training center for his skills. Even as he asked whether they could really go on like this, he continued to run forward, finding no other alternative. The moment they entered the forest, a corrupted dryad that seemed to act as the chief gatekeeper and was latched onto a giant tree noticed them. Giok! It's not even a banshee. Shin Woo's goblin fire contorted at the sudden sound wave attack. This was no joke. Someone with eardrums would have sustained considerable damage from the attack. These senile old bags, how dare they try to teach me a lesson in screaming? Shin Woo grit his teeth, thinking about what method he would use to land the first strike, but soon changed his mind. He'd come here not to grow as a joker, but to develop his acid resistance and regeneration skills. Shin Woo, they're coming. Yeah, I see them too. The dryad's scream was the signal. All the trees began spewing out their acid poison all at once. It wasn't a simple acid poison, as it seemed as though there was a suspicious compound mixed in. Fortunately, it seemed it didn't really have much of an effect on Shin Woo and Jin as they were undead. You are being affected by a high-ranked acid poison that has spread throughout the entire area, reducing the damage of acid poison by at least 70%. Of course, that wasn't the end. After spewing the poison mist, the trees extended their branches towards Shin Woo, as if they had become living organisms. The branches stretched like rubber bands, and were swung at them like whips. Hup! However, Shin Woo was already well aware of how they would attack through the skeleton's memories, and skillfully swung his axe, cutting bundles of branches that came flying towards him. The tree branches possess a powerful acid poison as well, so when they made contact with a weapon, they're supposed to corrode them. However, the melting bone double axe's element was acid, so its blade remained intact despite cleaving through dozens of branches. The poison's getting worse. Concentrate on our connection. I got it. In the process of cutting through the branches, the acid poison liquefied once more and spewed out. The cut branches more violently spewed out a higher volume of acid. In terms of level, the acid poison was perhaps at a high intermediate level, and dozens or even hundreds of trees stacked that horrific acid poison, causing the effect to become even more violent than before. If it was like this from the start, he couldn't imagine what it'd be like when they got deep into the forest. Shin Woo. Yeah, I know. It's okay. Jin wasn't the only one suffering. Even his reinforced resistance couldn't completely block the poison, as it started to slowly melt away his armor. Shin Woo calmly cleaved through the branches that lay beyond the poison, and inspected the condition of his armor. He carefully placed his hand atop the armor and muttered, "Regeneration. Regeneration." It was an ability that restored his body. However, like Shin Woo had roughly expected, it activated properly and regenerated the melted armor. At that moment, his regeneration skill, which he hadn't had an opportunity to use in such a long time, leveled up. The low-rank regeneration skill has become LV8. Health and magic have increased by 2. Regeneration speed increases. Good. As I thought, it does work. Normally, regeneration could only be applied to the body. That's why he had de-equipped all of his gear when he had trained his acid resistance and regeneration with the slimes. That's right. Previously, his regeneration skill could only be used on his body. No, to be more exact, that's how it was even to this day. There was only one thing that changed: the identity of his equipment. I was sure after seeing that rule of bone applies to the equipment formed through Bone Armory. The equipment summoned through the stored information of Bone Armory are all considered my body. If his equipment were treated as his body, there wouldn't be any reason for his regeneration skill to not to work on his equipment too, would there? Shin Woo had thought so, and in reality, he had been right on the money. As a result, Shin Woo wore his full set of armor and started training. Jin saw that moment of fraudulent healing and screamed, his goblin fire quivering, even in the midst of enduring the acid poison. That's unfair. You have steel body which protects your entire body. Eek. As they were affected by the acid poison, their respective resistances grew, and at the same time, Shin Woo's regeneration skill, Steel Heart for Jin, was trained as well. Since the skills ultimately used mana, his mana bone skill was trained as well. This training method was like killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Jaak! Shut up! At the Dryad's excited command, the branches flew towards them as one. Shin Woo cleaved through the branches before they reached them, and in the spur of the moment, decided to train his defense zone as well. It was no longer killing 3 birds with 1 stone, but 4. Shin Woo hectically swung his axe with both hands, clearing away the branches, and inwardly nodded his head in approval. This place, with branches flying in every direction, was perfect for training his defense zone with bursting thunder applied to it. It's not perfect yet, but this is good enough. It's much better than when I had to use my fists. Shin Woo recollected his past training, even though it hadn't been a few months since, and suddenly felt a sense of longing. Level 5 seemed so far away back then, yet he'd already reached it. Things had become a lot better compared to back then. Above all, what he was most prideful of was the fact that he hadn't died even once since then. Hup! Guak! Jeek! He cleaved through the tree branches that flew from various angles and proceeded 1 centimeter forward every minute for a while. As if answering the old Dryad's screams, Shin Woo forcefully struck with his axe and finally succeeded in toppling one of the trees. He'd verified before, but they were indeed normal level 5 monsters, with rebellion in effect, status plus 10%, as well as reinforcing his axe with rule of bone. The trees couldn't withstand a few blows and toppled to the floor. Jaak! As soon as he cut through the rotted tree, the nearby Dryads emitted a truly horrific scream. Though they had become hideous, they seemed to retain their love for trees. The old women's screams were of genuine sadness, and even Shin Woo felt a stir in his heart. You have acquired an acid tree root. It is transformed through bone reinforcement. You have acquired a melting bone root. You have acquired 17,560 perium. I'll purify you all so that you don't have to suffer any longer. I saw you smiling. You asshole. The skeleton, who couldn't help but smile, Shin Woo, was bombarded by countless tree branches and acid poison once more. Shin Woo's goblin fire blazed as he swung his axe once again. It was time for the skeleton lumberjack to begin his felling operation in earnest. About 3 days after entering the forest of rotten trees that was under the Dryad's control, Shin Woo had become trapped deep into the forest without knowing where he'd even come from, without looking at the minimap, of course. It's still like this despite cutting down every single tree that came our way. I want to just set this entire forest on fire. No way. At least, not yet. Kayak! The Dryads screamed with such great timing as they were finished with their conversation. As if waiting for that signal, a group of acid trees' sharp branches stretched towards them in all directions. Shin Woo tightly gripped his axe with both hands and swung while on horseback. He cleaved the approaching branches, with the closest taking priority. Hoo! Hup! Lightning scatter! It wasn't possible without maintaining his speed. No, he needed to be even faster than that. His defense zone had been incredibly clumsy at the beginning, but it was easy to see that he'd fine-tuned it now. To the point that he could feel what part of his body he needed to reinforce. The intermediate bursting thunder skill has become LV4. Strength and magic have increased by 10. Holy crap. It felt like this was going to happen, but bursting thunder did actually level up. I was training my acid resistance, but now I'm just training my weapon skills. What are you talking about? You're training your acid resistance and regeneration plenty. Honestly, Jin was right. For the past 3 days, Shin Woo and Jin were affected by the acid poison spewed by the great trees without even a second of rest. Like they were enjoying a mist sauna. If someone else saw them, they might have thought that the two weren't in any sort of pain, but despite them being undead, they did feel pain, and the forest's acid poison wasn't a tingling sensation, but it felt more like thick metal thorns violently piercing their bodies. It was the same now as well. Coo, this doesn't hurt for you? It does hurt. But I knew this is what it would be like before coming in. Ah, seriously. Though Jin had a strong urge to just escape the forest by himself, he managed to endure with a peculiar athlete's spite that Shin Woo is enduring just fine, so I can't complain. Of course, the results of that were clear. Shin Woo's acid resistance became intermediate level 2, while Jin's became low rank level 7. Even his regeneration skill, which was quite difficult to level up, had already gone up to low rank level 9. This guy couldn't have been just some ordinary guy on his homeworld. Jin suddenly recollected the pain he'd endured over the past 3 days, but when he saw Shin Woo calmly swing his axe from atop him, he grit his teeth. Even if he considered the fact that Shin Woo was undead and possessed a skill that protected against mental ailments, no ordinary salaryman would be able to endure that kind of horrific pain. At least, that's how it was in Jin's original world. I wonder what Shin Woo did in his original world. Was he like me? Damn it, we're partners, yet there's too much we don't know about each other. No, am I just too concerned about the past when it's completely useless here? Jin, one step to the left. Jin? Yeah, I know. Nice. Hup. Kayak. Even while inwardly gritting his teeth, Jin moved his body at the optimum time, assisting Shin Woo's own movement. It was like they were moving as one. That's right. Shin Woo and Jin's connection, assimilation, was developing by the day. The intermediate assimilation skill has become LV3. Agility and magic have increased by 5. You can now match your breath with your target. You can guess what the other is thinking without even saying it. Because his assimilation skill had risen from level 2 to 3, Shin Woo's own acid resistance was almost fully applied to Jin, and Shin Woo succeeded in sharing Jin's dynamic visual acuity, as well as the reflexes that came from his agility. Hup! You have acquired 17,220 perium. You have acquired 2 melting bone roots. From the start, the reason he wanted to train his defense zone was because he wanted to maximize the effectiveness of those sluggish movements, as a result of his struggles. The range at which he could perceive attacks through his dynamic visual acuity became wider, and because his reflexes likewise improved, he was able to stop attacks with his concise body movements. His defense zone had improved significantly, to the point that even a senior knight would click his tongue at the change. As I thought, it was a good idea to pick this spot. Are all the other heroes like this? They go to strange places to train? Maybe? He didn't know about fighting against an entire undead corps, but he thought that the other heroes would definitely like this place, as it offered invaluable training, acid resistance, regeneration, mana, weapon techniques, and wasn't particularly that difficult if one possessed acid resistance. That's what he thinks. Therefore, he did feel like telling the other heroes about it, but it's pointless telling the others about this place since this place will be gone by the time we leave. You say such scary things in such a nonchalant way. Jeek. Maybe I should train my fire element as well. In the end, you're going with what I suggested. You're going to burn the forest, huh? Shin Woo interestingly swung his axe and, as they passed by a tree that a dryad had inhabited, Jin muttered in amazement. Shin Woo didn't hate the other heroes, but he fundamentally thought of himself first. You have acquired 16,800 perium. You have acquired a melting bone root. In the beginning, he swung his axe several times just to get past them, but now, the trees always died in one hit. Though he had indeed figured out the way to kill them, the fact that he killed them in a single blow meant each and every strike was a critical hit. Shin Woo thought it would be strange if someone couldn't land a critical hit, despite the fact that their enemies couldn't move as their roots were embedded into the ground. However, the difficulty in cutting through a gigantic tree when there were hundreds of branches coming his way in all directions was beyond imagination. I've somewhat grasped the basics of the defense zone. Now I have to more proactively use it. Fine, I can do it. Let's try it. He had honestly only intended to train his acid resistance in the beginning, yet it had now become a time to train his combat fundamentals. It was worth doing, and was quite the satisfying situation. Shin Woo inwardly laughed satisfyingly. Jin, who seemed to have read him like a book, desperately yelled. He needed to desperately absorb the surrounding mana so that he could maintain steel heart. You idiot! The poison mist is still pervading our bodies. We're still training our acid resistance. 2 days more passed, and his acid resistance had leveled up once more. At the same time, Another skill leveled up as well. The intermediate acid resistance skill has become LV4. Magic has increased by 10. Your understanding of acid deepens and have acquired proficiency in acid-type skills. Intermediate acid has become LV5. Magic has increased by 10. The acid's density control has increased. He'd thought that this might happen, but his acid element had leveled up following his acid resistance. Though Shin Woo was happy about the level up, he couldn't wait to acquire fire resistance or lightning resistance. While his elements wouldn't hurt their master, would he have to make it so they could obtain those resistances? If Jin heard about this, he would say that he's a crazy bastard. You crazy bastard! Even though he couldn't read his mind, Jin condemned him anyway. Of course, there was a different, valid reason for that condemnation. Why are you taking off a piece of your armor? Well, since my resistance leveled up too fast, their poison isn't really working on my anymore, so I took off a piece of armor. See, my bone is melting. Now this is how you level up a skill. Ah! He was normally calm and composed and even had some cool parts to him, but why did he become so crazy over skill training? However, what pissed Jin off the most was that when one gets familiar with that stupid behavior, they realize that he can only make those calls because he's taking into consideration the most effective way to train. The low-rank regeneration skill has become LV10 and has evolved into the intermediate level. Severe injuries and status ailments can be restored. Health and magic have increased by 10. As expected, maintaining a harsh training environment resulted in his regeneration skill going up to the intermediate level in about another day. Now, aside from the twin horn charge that he'd gained recently, as well as the low-rank level 8 fire element, all of his skills had grown to the intermediate level. Ah, my steel heart went up to the intermediate level too. See? It was effective training. Yeah, you're right. Jin replied while desperately gritting his teeth. Then, Shin Woo discovered something, stopped his hand which had been swinging the axe, and spoke. More importantly, look over there. Huh? Jin raised his head at Shin Woo's call. There was a dryad that had fallen and come out of the tree that Shin Woo had just felled that flew deeper into the forest. Man, they're helplessly running away again. You're really not killing them? You're supposed to save the best dish for last. And whenever the dryads saw Shin Woo, they would scream and command the trees to attack him, but they didn't dare show up in front of Shin Woo. And when he'd destroyed all the trees in the vicinity, they seemed to retreat into the deep depths of the forest. Of course, Shin Woo had a method of stopping their retreat, but he didn't do so. That's because the dryads who retreated deeper into the forest were acting as signposts for him. Signposts? Yeah. The answer's there when you think about why the dryads are protecting this dead forest and attacking trespassers. Isn't it instinctual? They've become completely corrupted, and their sense of self seems faint. No. Though their consciousness has become weak, they're still spirits. Moreover, why would they so desperately attack trespassers, and when they fail in defending it, why do they lose that hostile attitude of theirs and escape deeper into the forest? That means? It definitely meant that there was something they wanted to protect deep within the forest. That meant that they had something they wanted to protect, despite being corrupted. Shin Woo was absolutely sure. Hearing that, Jin was in awe and muttered, "Wow, you're such an asshole. Why? I was just making a rational inference. You're letting them escape so they lead you to that valuable thing of theirs. You noticed that? You've really grown." He was right. Of course, his primary goal was to train, but if he could, why not kill two birds with one stone? Since the dryads were so desperately trying to protect it, that meant that it was definitely not something ordinary. Maybe it was their intention to allow this rotten forest to spread. The undead core tried to pass through here, yet they had to make a detour, remember? Yeah. I'm sure they didn't imagine that a demented bastard would call this place a training area and willingly enter it. It's much easier to run away than personally face something dirty. That was the same for heroes and undead. But what others considered dirty, Shin Woo considered worth exploring. In our country, There's a saying that heaven assists those who can help themselves. There's a saying like that in our country too. It also says that heaven will protect those who are honest. I don't believe in God. You liar. Would heaven aid Shin Woo, or would it abandon him? Shin Woo, who'd just decided to become an atheist, didn't really concern himself with whether it would or wouldn't, and quickly urged to follow behind the corrupted dryads. Jin stretched his legs, sighed, and began running after them. 10 days had already passed since he'd entered the forest protected by the corrupted dryads. Shin Woo had managed to increase his acid resistance and acid element by one more level, and became more adept at incorporating lightning into his weapon. It felt as though bursting thunder would level up soon. However, he thought about something else whilst felling trees and diligently training his skills. He was thinking about what the dryads were protecting. Isn't a world tree most likely? Then shouldn't undead elves have come out rather than corrupted dryads? It would be nice if it were a world tree. A rotten world tree. What a cool name. It felt like he would be subject to all the world's misfortunes if he broke off a branch and held onto it. Plus, he could make a great weapon out of it. Enough with your delusions. Swing your axe already. I am swinging it. Shin Woo's swung axe carried lightning's powerful cutting power. Before the trees succeeded in perforating him with their outstretched branches, Shin Woo cut right through them. They roared as he axed through them all at once. Following an inspection, he sighed in satisfaction. You have acquired 21,050 perium. You have acquired 2 melting bone roots. The deeper they went into the forest, the stronger the acid great trees were. There was a huge difference between a level 5 close to 1,600 in stats, and a level 5 close to 3,200 in stats. The fact that they left behind more perium was proof that they were stronger than the ones from before. However, Shin Woo continued to kill the acid great trees in a single blow, regardless of the fact that they were gradually getting stronger. His attacks were gradually becoming stronger as well. Hu, hup, hap, jaak. Though he'd made great strides in bursting thunder and the defense zone since coming here, he'd learned how to strike at one's weak spot, the most, in other words, critical hits. Critical hit was a skill at first and was absorbed by bursting thunder. However, just thoughtlessly swinging my weapon around won't improve the skill. I have looked into it and developed it myself. Bursting thunder is a skill that combines all close combat skills and is a top-ranked combat technique, but it's also incredibly difficult to level up precisely because it's a top-ranked skill. Furthermore, leveling up the skill didn't mean that he would become proficient in every skill contained within it. The world wouldn't give him anything cheap. In order to master this supreme skill, Shin Woo would have to put in the effort in various fields. Among those various fields, he felt like his current critical hit training was a key factor in mastering bursting thunder, which allowed him to attack quickly and explode forcefully. You have acquired 22,510 perium. You have acquired a melting bone root. Hu, hup. He didn't have the chance to regain his breath, even if he toppled a tree. Suddenly, other tree branches came at him from all directions. The deeper Shin Woo got by following the dryads, the more desperately the trees tried to stop him, and at some point, roots began bursting from the once unscathed ground. Of course, it was Jin's job to deal with those. They're cutting through my armor. Calm down, and cut the ones closest to you first. Easy for you to say. Who? More and more of them keep coming. There were hundreds of them attacking from above, below, and the sides. Fighting off the tree branches and the roots made Shin Woo think of some comics and films he'd seen on Earth. It would have been a nice scene if the branches were attempting to tie up an elf, rather than a skeleton horse and a skeleton, but reality is cruel. Damn it, their movements are disgusting. That's why I told you to cut them before they tie you up. You have to protect your body too. I'll break my back trying to match you. It took only about 2 days for Jin to get adjusted to the protruding tree roots, and consequently Shin Woo had to endure atop Jin's back, as if he were in a rodeo. However, Shin Woo shared Jin's dynamic visual acuity and reflexes that came from his high agility, while Jin shared Li Shin Woo's calm and keen movements, as well as his situational awareness. He didn't do so often, but when he was in a desperate situation, Jin would use all of Li Shin Woo's ability to his advantage to survive. And the result of that was clear. Critical hit. We got out. Hup. Jin was able to cut through the roots and Li Shin Woo cut down the weakened trees one by one, toppling 3 trees in succession. Then, he finally managed to take a breath. Because they had cut down all of the trees nearby, they had temporarily created a safe zone where they wouldn't be attacked. Giok! He'd heard that scream so often that it sounded sweet to him now. He followed the dryad's scream and turned his attention to the source, and was close enough now that he could see the dryad flying away. When he confirmed that he was indeed close, Li Shin Woo's goblin fire rotated round and round. It looks like the dryads are gathered in one place. We might be able to see something interesting if we play our cards right. Like a level 6 elite? Ha! Li Shin Woo began thinking about whether he had revealed too much of his intentions to Jin, but it was too late to start thinking about that. He smiled awkwardly and marked their corresponding location on his minimap. Then he turned his body around. It was in the opposite direction that he'd seen the dryads go in. What? I'd love to go over there right now, but we're not done training. Li Shin Woo's acid resistance still wasn't at a level where it would prevent all of the tree's acid poison mist damage. He had no plans of going to the center of the forest until he reached his goal. Moreover, if you consider the fact that their acid poison becomes stronger the deeper you go, the boss fight at this end of this will. Won't it have a high-rank acid poison? Maybe. Ugh! Jin, who was already imagining that moment, silently screamed. This was much too harsh an environment for Jin, who had just reached intermediate acid resistance. That's why we should keep training. We can't let the sacrifices of the dryads and this forest go to waste. I don't think anyone thinks they're sacrificing themselves for you. Li Shin Woo crisply ignored Jin's muttering. His acid resistance was still only intermediate level 5. He didn't have any time to waste if he wanted to train his acid resistance to the point that he'd take no damage from acid. The intermediate assimilation skill has become LV4. Agility and magic have increased by 5. Sensing the range of assimilation gradually increasing. 2 weeks had passed since they'd entered the forest. Now Li Shin Woo could endure the acid poison with only a helmet on. The Acid Skull full helm possessed an option that increased the effectiveness of acid-related skills by 20%, but that alone wouldn't be able to effectively protect Li Shin Woo's body from acid, and Li Shin Woo's body was still melting. But because of that, that allowed him to train his acid resistance and regeneration skills, so there was nothing better. The intermediate regeneration skill has become LV2. Health and magic have increased by 5. Regeneration speed increases. Good. It's going smoothly. Rather, it feels like I still have some mana left over. I feel like I can melt a bit more. I want to learn that regeneration skill too. If we meet a rural rat queen later, let's have a talk with her then. Li Shin Woo said, as he rubbed bone powder on the half-dead Jin. As he thought, that dungeon was an unusual and difficult dungeon. He'd found a few other rat dungeons after that, but he hadn't been able to find any other queens. It seems like we're still far off from going to the center since you still sound like you're dying. Are you planning on training all of your resistances like this from now on? If I can. This was more efficient when compared to randomly hunting monsters and undead. In the process of training a variety of skills, not only do his stats increase, but his fundamentals improve as well. Li Shin Woo wasn't a sick bastard who derived pleasure from the training itself, but he was the type that could endure the pain of training for the results. But using the defense zone is too easy now. I'm confident that they'll never break through my defense. Then should we go further in now? We can't, since our resistance training isn't finished yet. Fine, I guess I have no choice but to use this method. Whenever Li Shin Woo was about to try something new, Jin wouldn't be able to hide his unease. What the hell was he attempting this time? How would it affect him? Jin was concerned and couldn't put up with it. Suddenly, the melting bone double axe appeared in the air. It was different from the one Shin Woo wielded. That meant it was created through bone armory. I'm training rule of bone. It takes a lot of concentration to control the flying axe, so it'll become harder to use the defense zone. In my home country, there's a saying that goes, the hardships of youth are invaluable. In my country, they say that hardship leads to success. No, let's stop. As expected, Shin Woo made the right call. It was no joke controlling the axe midair with rule of bone while maintaining the defense zone with the other axe. He almost died a few times, but Shin Woo didn't give up on controlling the axe. Ultimately, 3 more days passed. Now he could maintain his defense zone with the axe in his hands whilst controlling the axe in the air, which cleaved through the trees and branches from afar. Then, Shin Woo summoned another axe and controlled both at once while maintaining his defense zone. It becomes so much easier when I use 2 axes to slice through the nearby trees. I should send these guys a bit farther. You dumbass! Jin screamed. It was business as normal, so Shin Woo didn't pay attention to him. Soon, the rule of bone skill leveled up and further increased his control. Though that just made Shin Woo attempt to do things that were even more difficult. The bone armory skill has become LV5, and you can now maintain 5 pieces of equipment at one time. Health and magic have increased by 5. Time passed like that for a bit longer, and his bone armory skill finally leveled up. Because of his proficiency in the skill, he couldn't even imagine not being able to equip armor. However, the moment Shin Woo cheered at the skill level up, something else unexpected came with it. Your magic stat has surpassed 1000. You have acquired the title, One Loved by Mana. Magic has increased by 10. Your body is reborn more magic-friendly than before. There is high compatibility with your species, so magic has further increased by 10. Shin Woo muttered as he felt a slight change in his body that accompanied the message. His magic stat had already surpassed 1000. That in itself was surprising. But he could understand that, since most of his skills had a close connection with magic. However, he suddenly gained a title and his body had undergone a change, so he didn't take this lightly. The chatting channel. I don't want to cause another uproar, so I'll have to ask Kraisha about this later. When Kraisha gained the private chat function, she would message him first, so he decided that he'd ask her then. Shin Woo nodded his head and continued hunting. He didn't see any signs of his training ending anytime soon. Intermediate acid resistance has become LV8. Magic has increased by 5. You no longer fear acid. Intermediate acid has become LV8. Magic has increased by 5. You are now confident that you can melt all metal and bone. The intermediate bursting thunder skill has become LV6. Strength and magic have increased by 5. You should be able to cleave through lightning that descends from the sky. The intermediate mana bone skill has become LV6. Magic has increased by 20. The rule of bone skill has become LV7. You have become more adept at reinforcing and handling bone with just your will. A month and a half had passed since he'd come to the Forest of the Dryads, training his acid resistance, regeneration, bursting thunder, defense zone, assimilation, mana bone, rule of bone, and bone armory, though he'd originally come to just train his acid resistance. Then, Kraisha finally contacted him. So, it only happens the first time? Yeah. You get that title for the first stat that reaches 1000. Kraisha's voice was so cold, even through the chatting channel, that Shin Woo could imagine her expression. Shin Woo really liked her calm and restrained voice. Especially because he knew what would cause that cool-headedness to break. It's kind of like how level 5 determines what path you're going to take. You become specialized in one stat, and in order to become more familiar with it, the stat develops even further. Of course, my stat's magic since I'm a magician, but I heard that others specialize in a different stat. Shin Woo wasn't a magician, so he ended up becoming a bit uneasy. So it only happens the first time, huh? It makes me feel a bit uneasy. If you just consider your combat abilities, you might think that your other stats should have grown first, But when you think about it, all of those abilities are connected to magic, so I think the outcome was inevitable. TCH, that's true. Your bones are magic anyway, so it turned out well. She was right. Around that time, Shin Woo decided to accept it. Then, Kreisha changed the topic. Her voice became slightly sharp. So did you find anything good in the place you kept a secret from me? Haha, what are you talking about? There are no secrets between us. You seem to have gotten a lot out of it. He felt like Kreisha was trembling, and laughed merrily as he imagined that, but Jin pressed him all of a sudden. Left. I know, it's fine. I see everything. Jaak. Obviously, Shin Woo was in the midst of battle. Shin Woo hadn't stopped fighting even once in the last 45 days. Even though it was possible for him, as he was a skeleton, the mental strain was indescribable. Nevertheless, he endured. Though, it was one of the main factors that accelerated his growth. Of course, it was the same for Jin as well. But it's fine. Since I found something interesting as well. He was still talking with Kreisha. Shin Woo perversely thought that chatting with someone whilst fighting would help train his concentration, and listened carefully to what she had to say. Oh, and what's that? It's a secret, is what I'd like to say, but I'll tell you. Since I'm different from you. I'm an adult. Yeah, you're so mature. Shin Woo swung his axe and shattered the clumped-up branches that spun like a drill. Beyond that, the airborne axes flew to the tree's main body and toppled it. Aside from that, the other acid great trees in various areas were being ambushed by the other axes within the air. He'd summoned 1 or 2 axes initially in order to train his defense zone, and at some point, that number had increased to 4. In other words, Shin Woo was completely naked, or a nude skeleton. 1. I found traces of one of the 12 generals too. Really? If it's this easy to figure out, then our other seniors must know about it already. Probably. They hadn't yet realized that they were the greatest of the heroes that had come to this underground empire. I killed some undead who were formerly royal magicians, and luckily managed to combine their mana into a single magical formula. One of the artifacts that they had responded to that, and released information. Of course, the information contained within wasn't very important. If the empire still existed, then it would have been considered a third-class secret. It was report data on the plan to expand the training facility for magicians who defended the capital. The problem was the one who prepared that data. Head of the royal magicians, Theotane. He mentioned himself that he was one of the 12 generals, so he's definitely one of them. Head of the royal magicians. Shin Woo nodded his head naturally. Not all of the 12 generals would swing a sword or spear on the front lines and command their troops on the battlefield. It was a fantasy world, so it made sense that a magician was a general. You just figured out the name? Nothing else? I learned a bit about their communication system and codes. All that's left is to inspect the training facility recorded in this report. I'm going to go over there right now. All right, don't die. It's connected to a magician, so I might ask for your help soon. I'm not a magician. Who? Relax. You may not consider yourself a magician, but someone else does. I feel like I've heard something like that before. By the time Shin Woo finished his conversation with Kreisha and raised his head, the area was completely cleared of trees. Shin Woo sighed after retrieving the melting bone double axes that were violently spinning in the air. Their juniors are trying so hard, so would it kill our seniors to at least kill one of the 12 generals? You're probably hoping that they sell that bone to the secret shop. Exactly. The effect of a level 7 bone is tremendous, so what would a level 8 bone be like? I don't think any of the 12 generals are going down until we hit level 8. Honestly, Shin Woo thought the same. Their seniors may be heroes, but they were also humans with only one life, so there was probably no helping it. He sighed again and spoke. Let's just do what we can. Are we finally doing it? Yeah. When I hit intermediate level 8, it didn't seem like my acid resistance would level up no matter what I did, so it can't be helped. Shin Woo said stiffly. All that was behind them was a vast plain. For a month and a half, which seemed both short and long, they started from the outskirts of the forest and completely cleared out all the other areas except for the center of the forest where the dryads ran off to. When killed, the trees would turn into mana and vanish, leaving only their loot behind, which was characteristic of this world. There were no traces remaining that indicated that this was a forest, and if one were to walk past this area, they would be oblivious to the fact that there was originally a forest here. It's time to open the box of chocolates. 2. That's from Forrest Gump. You really were from my world, weren't you? How was this possible? Jin didn't react when he referenced animation, but as he thought, movies were a no-go. However, Shin Woo acted two-faced, even in a situation like this. Maybe. The name of the book I read was different. A book. As expected, he was able to fool him with a simple lie. Shin Woo acted as though he didn't see Jin's puzzled expression and activated Bone Armory. Then, his body was completely equipped with a helmet, upper body armor, and lower body armor. He unsummoned one of his axes, but he still retained 3 other axes, excluding his own. But will it really be okay? Yeah. By reducing the number to 3, my control's gotten a lot better. You're such a scary bastard. Shin Woo had started training his rule of bone skill in order to perfect his defense zone, and had become even more powerful than before as a result. To sum it up, awareness and control. If he was able to control his equipment with Rule of Bone, then he would be able to use them to attack his enemies, even in the midst of an intense battle. Moreover, if there was only one target to attack, he could control them as one, making it twice as easy to control them. I leveled up my resistance as much as I could, but I don't know how high of a level the enemy is. So you have to concentrate on our connection as much as possible. You're the one who let all the dryads go. Haha, that's all in the past. The final dryad had fled just a few minutes ago, but Jin couldn't retort. There shouldn't be any more dryads left in this forest. Yeah. If we exclude that area, that is. The deeper Shin Woo followed the dryads into the forest, the drearier and more frightening the energy became. At the end of it, the area was explicitly black, incomparable to the other areas of the forest. It seemed as though the essence of the forest was gathering in one spot, like a slime being burnt to a crisp and leaving behind only its core. If the other areas were a level 2 danger zone, then that area seems like a level 3 or 4 danger zone. We're level 5, so it's okay. It's not as scary as it looks. Can you stop trying to calm me down like I'm a kid? They carefully began to move. With every step, they became more in sync, and their assimilation rate became even higher than before. Their respective acid resistances combined and became one, increasing their effectiveness. They shared their stats, senses, and the advantageous parts of skills. They were changed. Now that it had been about 2 months since he'd learned the assimilation skill, they didn't sleep as they were undead, and would maintain the skill in most situations. Therefore, they were in complete sync. Don't come. Ah, what a typical starting line for a boss fight. You'll get hurt. Doesn't it sound like their voices are overlapping? As I thought, it looks like they're fused together. He'd let not 1, not 10, but more than 100 level 5 dryads go. How monstrous would they become if they were to combine all their strength together into one body? Shin Woo, the outer trees are. I see them. Though the trees would attack with their branches or their roots, they would never move on their own accord. However, they were uprooting themselves right now and going deeper into the forest. No, they're not moving of their own accord. Shin Woo denied in the next moment. To him, it looked like the mana the dryads spewed out was controlling and moving the trees. Shin Woo trembled. He realized that they were responding most splendidly to his decision to let them go. Most people would collapse, saying that they're screwed. Jin, I said that they were level 5 before, right? Yeah. Though Jin didn't want to keep moving forward, he had no choice. Jin walked forward with a tearful face and replied. Shin Woo, inwardly, smiled in satisfaction and spoke. That was a lie. Ah! Jin screamed with such great timing. The trees all around them uprooted themselves and walked towards the center of the forest. After that, A huge living being stood up from within. No, it was because the trees had exposed it. LV6 Corrupted Tree Golem, Elite. You have encountered a fused monster. This gatekeeper was created through the accumulation of countless corrupted dryads' wills, as well as the mana from the remaining withered trees. The Empire's curse will weaken if you destroy it. Though they had prepared for it, a large-scale, non-standard boss fight had begun. You have encountered an enemy a higher level than you. Rebellion increases all stats by 10%. Because of your partner, your stats increase by an additional 5%. All effects are shared with your partner. Shin Woo, what did you do? Oh, it's just a buff. It's a buff that lets us overcome the insurmountable wall before us. After Shin Woo confirmed that his rebellion skill had activated, he nodded his head with satisfaction and raised his head. The cause of the buff was the enormous boss monster that seemed like an agglomeration of the forest. LV6 Corrupted Tree Golem, Elite. The corrupted tree golem was entwined with countless trees, and the dryad's wills had entered in the spaces between, allowing for the creation of this fused monster. They gathered a similar type of karma into one spot, sublimating it into an even greater karma. Though its appearance differed, the fundamental principle behind this fusion was similar to the slime's transformation, where they would fuse with other slimes and be reborn as a high-ranked slime. Don't come. I'll kill you. Don't come. Shin Woo had experience hunting a level 6 elite, the core commander Vitas. However, Vitas was a magician, as well as a commander, and he had even been distracted by the magic cast by a level 6 hero. However, this foe was only aiming for them, was incomparably larger than Vitas, and possessed a special ability. I'll kill you. Shin Woo. It's poison. The golem, which was essentially one huge tree, shook its body, spewing out an overly deep concentration of black poison mist that instantaneously covered the entire area. Shin Woo comforted Jin, who was watching with an uneasy expression, with a calm voice. Our connection. Don't forget. Hup. The mist covered an extensive area, so it was impossible to escape it. As a matter of fact, doing so would essentially be giving up on the fight. He no longer possessed the Avenger skill anymore, so he didn't need to run away and come back anymore. You are being affected by high-rank acid poison mist. Intermediate acid resistance is reducing the damage by about 50%. It was as Shin Woo had expected. The tree golem, which resulted from merging the energy of the forest into one being, could spew out high-rank acid poison. If he hadn't equipped armor specializing in acid, he and Jin would have been a handful of bone powder by now. Surprisingly, I can take this much. Shin Woo watched as the acid poison spewed by the enormous golem quickly began melting the surface of his armor. If he had activated regeneration a bit slower, his ribs would have been melted away as well, but regeneration and acid resistance worked well together, so he could endure. No, he could actually. Please say it ain't so. Please. You're not doing what I think you are, right? Jin knew exactly what Shin Woo was going to do and spoke with a quivering voice. He was also enduring as Shin Woo shared his acid resistance with him, but if he lost that acid resistance for even an instant, he figured that his leg would get melted away, so he was slightly afraid. Though Shin Woo, who was maintaining his connection with Jin, could understand how he was feeling, he ultimately spoke like this. Now that we're here, why don't we level up our resistance to high rank before we go? Please no. We need to analyze it to figure out how it attacks. Our analysis might take a little bit longer, though. Ah, I thought as much. Maybe this was Shin Woo's intent from the start. The moment he could no longer properly train his resistance with the ordinary trees, he made up his mind to train his resistance through the boss monster. Jin realized that there was already no turning back, and when he resigned himself, Shin Woo said something meaningless. You have to start concentrating. We need to thoroughly analyze its techniques and attack patterns. You mean while we endure all the acid poison, right? Exactly. He was saying that he'd train his acid resistance while scouting out the boss. Even at this very moment, the tree golem stretched out its wooden arm and attacked. At the same time, it violently spewed out its high-rank acid poison. You have being affected by high-rank acid poison mist. The mana in the entire area is contaminated by acid. Hup. A high rank didn't just mean it was powerful. There was also the contamination of mana. At this level, the acid poison covered the entire area, contaminating the air, mana, and everything else. Even though Shin Woo and Jin didn't need to breathe, as they were undead, they naturally absorbed mana, but by doing so, they would instead absorb acid into their bodies. Damn it. I'm not taking any damage because of my resistance, but when I filter all the acid out, I don't have much mana left. I guess this is how an enemy possessing the ability to use a high-rank element fights. It completely controls the area by changing it to its own element and prevents its enemy from moving. Ultimately, it's not much different from a game of Go. But even as he said this, Shin Woo sported a smile. Comparing it to Go was only applicable when both players' pieces were different colors. Unfortunately, Shin Woo possessed intermediate level 8 acid resistance. Jin, tell me when you're running low on mana. I'll give you mana when you need it. Are you okay? Yeah, I have plenty of mana. He was indeed overflowing with mana. Shin Woo had more mana now than when he started the battle. It didn't matter whether the surrounding mana had been contaminated by acid or not. He would draw in both acid and mana through his intermediate level 6 mana bone. You can change mana into acid, so it isn't very difficult to do the reverse. This situation is actually in my favor. It might have been different had it been high-rank acid poison, but he didn't sustain any damage from mana mixed with a lower concentration of acid, and was able to transform the acid into mana. It felt like his acid resistance, acid element, as well as his mana were undergoing training right now. Nice, my mana's rising. Shin Woo felt his acid resistance and acid element growing sharply and his jawbone rattled in satisfaction. Whenever the golem spewed out the mist, he felt like his acid element grew slightly. It really wasn't so bad. Moreover, I may not know what it's protecting, but it's not moving from its spot. It may not have been so easy if we had gone in and recklessly attacked, but it should be an easy win if all we have to do is dodge and defend. It's not easy, you know? My body's already melting away, so it feels like I'm dying. Keep it up. Another branch is coming. Ah! As Shin Woo said, the golem acted like it was desperately defending something, even though there was nothing remaining in the forest. It firmly remained in that spot, guarding it with its life, spewing acid and stretching out its branches. If it had started to move, Shin Woo wouldn't have had any other choice but to respond more aggressively. However, he didn't need to evade or block its acid poison, and as long as he dodged its extending arms, he didn't really have anything to worry about. Stop hurting the forest. Don't worry. There's no forest to hurt anymore. Guak! Hundreds of thick tree branches shot out from the golem's body and stretched like whips towards Shin Woo and Jin. Each branch possessed a frightening amount of force, as it was a level 6 elite. Critical hit. However, before those branches could skewer them, a rotating melting bone double axe in the air swooped down and cut past the branches. Dozens of branches broke with a cracking sound, fell to the ground, and emitted acid poison before vanishing. Kuok! It's not over yet. Then, 2 more axes swooped down and violently cut through the branches. The sight of the axes, reinforced by rule of bone, going into flight formation and cleaving through the branches was truly magnificent. Not a single branch could come close to Shin Woo or Jin. That's right. Only Shin Woo was able to protect himself with this expanded defense zone, as the axes followed his will, the one who possessed rule of bone. He could cover a certain range with these axes and anything that came within that range would be destroyed. You dumbass! You should be shooting those tentacles at someone else, not me. Kua! As soon as he perfectly guarded against the attack, the infuriated golem's branches burst forth, but Shin Woo calmly controlled his axes and blocked them as well. It would have been a bit harder if it had attacked him from all sides, but because it consolidated its attack, it was even easier to guard against. Die. D. TCH. Hup. Because it was a level 6 elite monster, There was quite a hefty weight behind each and every branch, but because he had prepared for this moment by training his rule of bone skill, Shin Woo wasn't pushed back the whole time. If there was something he couldn't cut through with one axe, then 2 or 3 axes attacking simultaneously should do it. I'm a lot different from when I fought Vitas. To be precise, my stats have increased by about 1,200 since then. Don't Komi. Whenever a branch shot out, Shin Woo's axe would block it, so the golem started rampaging about. Because of that, the acid poison that it was spewing intensified as well. That was exactly what Shin Woo was hoping for. If I play my cards right, my skill should level up within a day. You're saying that I have to avoid this awful bastard for an entire day. Jin had a hunch that what Shin Woo was waiting for had finally come. Now he had no choice but to die. There were several moments until now where he felt like he would die, but this time, he'd die 100%. He would just hang out with a level 6 elite monster for an entire day? It was finally his time to die. But at the very least, it was a relief that his Blessing of Death's revival ability had increased to 3 as he had gone around and fought several high-leveled enemies, in other words, enemies deeply affected by the curse, with Shin Woo. It's alright. We can do it. It's not much different from the rest of our fights in the forest. UHMP. Kyahak. Meanwhile, had the tree golem figured out Shin Woo's abilities? All of a sudden, the tree golem's tree branches became tougher. To be exact, the branches entangled with other branches, taking the form of a twisted breadstick. It had begun shooting out the dried branches. He couldn't take care of those branches with just the axes he controlled from afar, so he had to move his body. Shin Woo, won't it come at us with a huge attack at this rate? No, it shouldn't. This is probably the best it can do. Hup. Well, as long as we don't get any closer, that is. As they were barely out of range, the tree couldn't attack them personally by swinging its arms and legs. The golem would never attack them personally and just attack them with its acid poison and by extending its branches. They would have to get closer to take down the main body, but Shin Woo still needed to train his acid resistance, so there was no way he'd do that. Right now he was worried that cutting the branches would weaken its poison. Don't Komi. Even when it changed its tactics, Shin Woo didn't die and the golem spread its acid as its temper flared even more. The dryads, which the golem had absorbed, shrieked with the voices of old women that struck Shin Woo and Jin like a curse. However, Shin Woo and Jin possessed the ability to ignore the curse, so they didn't cower in the least. Man, what the hell are you even protecting? You're really pissing me off. I think I know what they're protecting now. Shin Woo swung his axe once more, cleared the branches, and laughed. If what they were so desperately protecting couldn't be seen above ground, then there was only one answer there. There's a space under its feet. And the space under its feet was probably a dungeon. They went so far as to be corrupted to protect it. He really wanted to figure out what it was immediately, but was prudent. Right now, training his acid resistance took priority. The tree golem wailed. Shin Woo tightly gripped the axe, and his goblin fire blazed. The lengthy battle had just begun. Lloyd HK, it was huge. Its mana was tremendous as well. I could feel how powerful it was, even though it was so far away. Prince Altania, isn't it just a big creature? I think I could take it. Yasunori Akira, why don't you go over there then? I would have gone myself if I was nearby. Oh well. It had truly been a long time since the other heroes had entered the chatting channel and they were excited in a different way. After Shino Rendu died, the channel had become stagnant, but because they'd discovered a new elite monster, they were all starting to come back. Shin Woo. Is the monster so powerful that even you, seniors, wouldn't dare face it? Shin Woo leisurely cut that powerful monster's outstretched branches and spoke in the channel. He'd fought the tree golem for a few days now and had become bored, so he entered the chatting channel to increase the effectiveness of his training. Aryan Ruparte, we don't know. Since we haven't gotten close and personally ascertained its level. However, if it truly was created in the melting forest, one of the renowned areas of the empire. Ethan Cruz. Oh my God. You're talking about that forest in the northwestern outskirts of the empire, right? Once you enter, you're helpless as your gear starts to melt right away, and let's not talk about your body. Prince Altania. Hang, a forest? Then it's simple. I just need to use my special fire magic from afar and burn it to a crisp. Prince acted conceitedly and Arian snorted. Arian Ruparte. Unfortunately for you, Sir Altania, I believe there's a strange energy protecting the forest. You would likely be unable to burn a single tree before you completely remove that energy. Prince Altania. What? A stronger force can overcome a weaker force. Arian Ruparte. What I'm saying is that it'd be difficult for you, Sir Altania, as there's quite a bit of that energy there. Prince Altania. Shin Woo. What do you mean by a strange energy? She was definitely talking about the dryads, but Shin Woo feigned ignorance. It had the feeling of, oh, there's a place like that? I wouldn't even dare going there, so Arian replied satisfyingly. Arian Ruparte. I believe they're corrupted spirits. They were called dryads in my world. If they're really dryads, then it's truly miserable and depressing. Dryads treasure trees and love anything that is alive. So what you're saying is, Kua. At that moment, it seemed like the golem couldn't take any more of this slow-paced battle and wailed loudly. Thousands of tree branches rose into the air and fused into one. That completed giant tree hammer fell upon them like an arrow. Jin was startled, moved his body, and evaded it. But then, the hammer impacted the ground with a quang. Following that, the hammer transformed into an immense concentration of acid poison and thickly spread everywhere. That powerful acid, which looked like it would melt any type of equipment like Ethan Cruz had said, covered Shin Woo and Jin simultaneously. You are being affected by the high-rank acid hammer. Intermediate acid resistance reduces the damage by about 60%. Kuhek. I really want to stop doing this. I did enough. Shin Woo, we can stop now, right? Right? Bear with it a bit more, Jin. We can't stop now. It was only for an instant, but Shin Woo's armor was completely melted away, as well as half of his arms and legs. It was the same for Jin as well. Although he possessed intermediate level 9 resistance, he couldn't avoid taking a significant amount of damage from the poison. That was the golem's power. I can't. I'll die. I'll really die. See you later, Shin Woo. You won't die. Don't worry. And it went exactly as Shin Woo said. His hastily activated regeneration skill restored not only his own body, but Jin's melting body as well. Of course, this was all due to his assimilation skill, which had grown to intermediate level 5. Arian Ruparte. That acid is much too powerful for us to endure, and will not only melt through metal, but our bodies as well. Even if you can use magic well, you'd have to sacrifice both your skin and muscles to block it. You must not recklessly approach the forest. Yasunori Akira. Haha, it certainly is interesting, but you can't throw away your life just because you're curious. While his seniors laughed with a ha-ha or ho-ho and forbade entrance to the melting forest, Shin Woo completely healed his body. Jin, who was unable to finish this fight, sighed and asked Shin Woo, "What level is your regeneration skill?" Intermediate level 7. It leveled up by 5 levels. Well, we've both been melted so many times. Since he could absorb a portion of the acid as mana, he was overflowing with mana. He used all of that mana for regeneration, and after repeatedly using it on himself and Jin, his skill grew quickly. Skills always grew quickly in extreme situations, and objectively assessing the situation the two were in would result in something like this. They're fighting a seemingly unbeatable foe and have miraculously endured for 3 whole days. Arian Ruparte. I don't know how that monster was created, but the only thing we can do is either wait for it to calm down, or wait for it to leave the forest. Lloyd HK. Shin Woo, weren't you around there? Are you okay? Shin Woo. I'm okay since I took Senior Arian's words to heart and went in the opposite direction. However, Even I can see its head from where I am. It's quite frightening. Yasunori Akira. Don't overdo it, Shin Woo. Since you're growing rapidly, even now. You said you passed 2,500 stats? Prince Altania. You monster. I have to get to level 7 before you catch up. Lloyd HK. You're west, right? Are you finding any dungeons? Prince Altania. Don't know. Stop acting like you're concerned about me and enjoy dating that granny elf. Arian Ruparte? Granny? Granny. What did you say, Sir Altania? The chatting channel is filled with lies. Shin Woo would feel bad if he lied anymore, so Shin Woo stopped listening to his seniors and left the chatting channel. Over the past 3 days, the tree golem's body had shrunk significantly, so he could see it all with a single glance. I've been continuously cutting the branches, so it's been shrinking. But no matter how many branches he cut, the mana in its main body wouldn't diminish, and the smaller its body became, the sharper and tougher its branches became. Shin Woo had given up on cutting all the branches, and was in the middle of picking out its weakest branches and cutting them with his 3 axes, but perhaps that wouldn't even be possible soon. If that happens, then I'll really have to take down the main body. Since they'd been fighting the tree golem for 3 days already, Shin Woo already knew all of its special characteristics. He was also aware of the difference in stats between them. Shin Woo and Jin's teamwork was good enough to overcome that stat differential. It filled in all the gaps that the rebellion skill couldn't cover. Therefore, he wouldn't hesitate when his resistance went up to the high rank level. He would cleave through its body and burn it to a crisp. Shin Woo inwardly made that decision. However, a problem occurred before he could make that happen. He cut the golem's fired branches with his flawless axe technique and absorbed as much of the spewed acid as he could. Then, Shin Woo heard something that made him flinch. He thought it might be an illusion, but it wasn't. How is this possible? In the center of the tree golem's body, where countless screams had been emitted, one of the voices suddenly changed to that of a young girl's. Was that all? A portion of the branches coming towards them stopped midair as well. Shin Woo realized this and stood in shock. The small, but distinct girl's voice continued. In the end, we became like this. Guak. Don't come. Die. Please die. Her refreshing voice was accompanied by the other old women's voices, which actually made the mood even gloomier. Shin Woo cleared the branches flying towards him and yelled. Have you gotten a hold of yourself now? He's actually acting like someone whose original plan was to awaken the dryads. He was always ready to act anywhere and anytime depending on the situation at hand, which was why he could respond so quickly. Because he acted so naturally, the dryad didn't find him suspicious and replied. I remember everything. You didn't attack us ever since entering the forest. In the end, you protected us, even going so far as to risk your life. I just couldn't harm you dryads, the protectors of this forest. I didn't have a good way of saving you, and I was just being foolish. Blah. Jin retched at Shin Woo's despicable acting. Even while doing so, he skillfully avoided the branches that came flying at them. He'd become skilled enough that he could dodge them in his sleep. That mysterious ability of yours to absorb the curse. I see. It's because of that ability of yours that I'm briefly able to regain my sanity. It must be because of that ability that you're able to remain sane even after becoming a skeleton. Yeah, you're right. So this all happened because of Jin's ability to absorb the curse. Shin Woo acted calm and replied, but was actually astonished on the inside. Then again, they had fought the same opponent for 3 whole days while Jin remained in contact with the nearby mana the entire time, so it wasn't very strange that they made this new discovery. He needed to look into this more in the future. He thought it was just a skill that revived him, but this was proof that there was something more tremendous that lay hidden within Jin's skill. Thank you for your efforts and sincerity. However, it's much too late now. I didn't think we'd be corrupted to this extent. I have a shameless request for you, who risked your life to protect us dryads. Could you please listen to my request? Right after regaining her sanity, she had a request? It must be considerably urgent. If not, then she must deeply trust Shin Woo, as he was the one who protected them. Either way, this was the result of Shin Woo's acting skill. Is it too much? No, go ahead. Shin Woo felt slightly conflicted, but ultimately nodded his head. Then, the Dryad spoke happily, as if she knew he would do that. Please seek out the General, Dana von Etleber. She should be safe from all of this, as she's loved by countless spirits. Please tell her where we are, and please give her this. Suddenly, something shot out of the golem's torso and fell before Shin Woo. Shin Woo cut through the branches without much difficulty and picked it up. It was a crystal radiating a pale green light. Spirit's Spring Key Fragment. A precious artifact made of pure mana that is only given to the world's spirits. It can only be given to someone approved of by a spirit, and is also a token of friendship. Using this and a few other materials, you can open a passageway that allows you to enter the spirit's spring. You just need to give that to her. As soon as possible. If you do that, she'll take care of everything. And with that, our kind will somehow. She spoke with a light-hearted voice, as if she had just let go of a heavy burden. The Dryad wouldn't have imagined that Shin Woo could see the crystal's information as he was a hero. Please go find her. Hurry. There's no hope for us. I'll lose my sanity soon. Please run while I can still maintain control over this golem. Run away and give Dana von Etleber. Hey! Shin Woo called the Dryad with a sincere and refined voice akin to a skeleton knight's, but she couldn't respond, as she used the rest of her energy into stopping the golem. At that moment, he thought it might, but the acting skill did indeed level up. The acting skill has become LV13. Who are you an ally to? And who are you an enemy to? Perhaps you yourself do not know the difference anymore. Shin Woo, what do we do? Jin used his connection through Shin Woo's assimilation skill to speak. Shin Woo replied seriously. Let's act like we can't run away and take it down. She's trying to not tell us anything. Yeah, you really are the worst. Can't you just call me the winner of our battle of wits? They acted as though the acid poison prevented them from escaping. Ultimately, the Dryad wailed, telling them to run away, and lost consciousness. He worried that the crystal she'd given him would disappear as well, but after confirming that it was safe, Shin Woo smiled in satisfaction and raised his axe once more. Then, shall we begin training again? Let's give it a rest, you demon. Jin weakly replied, yet moved as Shin Woo wished. Truthfully, he didn't want to finish off the golem yet either. There was still some time before their battle with the golem came to a close. Why? Shin Woo muttered in despair. 2 more days had passed since he'd acquired the spirit's spring key fragment from the Dryad. Why isn't my resistance leveling up? I'm almost there. I suppose not everyone can get a high-rank skill. Jin replied, uninterested. He was evading the golem's fists and feet from up close, and it was for no other reason but to be exposed to a higher concentration of acid poison. He went through all this painstaking effort to train his resistance. Jiga! Shin Woo, accept reality. That guy's at his limit too. Shin Woo raised his head at Jin's words and examined the golem. At the beginning, the golem was so massive that it seemed to reach up into the heavens, but now, it had shrunk to a mere 5 meters. It was only natural, as he'd cut so many of its branches. It seems like it can't even replenish its mana that well anymore. The concentration of its acid poison seems to be lessening, and its attacks are gradually getting weaker. Damn it. It must be at its limits if you can sense it too. As they fought against the golem, Shin Woo and Jin's dramatic growth that came about due to the intense situation. Their skills made the battle feel much easier than it should have been, but they had to face the facts. Shin Woo bitterly agreed and tightly gripped his axe. It's time to let it go, right? Yeah. We have to let it go. We can finish it now. Gaha! The golem wailed with superb timing. What was the golem trying to convey? Was it a wail of misery? It was the boss of the melting forest, an area which even level 8 heroes were afraid of, yet it had been used to lower level heroes. If not, then was it weeping, as it was regretting asking such a wicked skeleton to fulfill its request? Honestly, he didn't really care. All right. Let's widen the distance a bit. Let's go with the big gun. Okay. They'd scuffled with the golem for about 5 days now, and Shin Woo didn't just swing his axe and talk in the chatting channel during that time. No way. He'd figured out the golem's characteristics, as well as its skill pattern, which used mana. Therefore, Shin Woo had run a few simulations on how to kill it the best way. Shin Woo had spoken to Jin several times and created a move that would kill the tree golem. But in order to execute that move, they would need to widen the distance. It seemed as though the golem misunderstood their intent. They're leaving. As soon as Shin Woo and Jin widened the distance, the golem yelled as if to cheer. They didn't even spew their acid poison and just saw them off. However, Shin Woo left them a present, as if responding to them. That present was the 3 melting double bone axes that remained in the air for the past 5 days. Surprisingly, the 3 axes contained the maximum amount of magic they could hold within them. If he combined the 3, they would easily surpass Shin Woo's maximum magic. The fact that Rule of Bone and Bone Armory grew might just be the best thing I got from this battle. As he fought the tree golems, he hadn't just gained mere skill level ups. He'd learned ways in which he could better use these skills. Just a little while ago, he hadn't thought of separately infusing mana into equipment he'd summoned and controlled through Bone Armory. He would either shift his mana to the weapons to increase their power or simply use the skill. But because of Rule of Bone, I've figured out a way to maintain the mana I've imbued the faraway weapons with. Normally, there's a limit to how much mana he can store in his body at one time. That was Mana Bone's limit. That limit has steadily increased with his level ups, his skill level, as well as his magic stat. But ultimately, he had a level 5's mana capacity. Shin Woo, right about here, right? Yeah. My weapons are on standby too. Giga. But as soon as he was able to store his mana into the equipment summoned through Bone Armory, as well as maintain that mana, he was essentially able to increase his maximum mana capacity. By shifting his mana to his equipment, his body's own mana supply would be empty. However, as he replenished his mana, the mana contained within his equipment wouldn't diminish. Ultimately, if he were to replenish his mana, Shin Woo could control more mana than before, his own supply, as well as what was contained within his equipment. He infused his mana into his axes in the moments he could spare whilst fighting the golem. Thus, his 3 axes were filled to the brim with mana. Shin Woo decided to call this fully charged. We're far enough, right? Yep. I'm changing my weapon to the Drake Horn Lance. Then let's get started. Twin Horn Charge. You got it. He switched to the Drake Horn Lance and took a charging stance. The moment Shin Woo gave the signal, Jin kicked off the floor and began sprinting at an explosive speed. Kawa! The golem was scuffling with the axes that Shin Woo had left behind, and once it realized that Shin Woo was approaching once more, it screamed and attempted to spew its acid poison again. But with just that much, it wouldn't be able to even slow them down by 0.001 seconds. 1. With his command, one of the axes in the air exploded spectacularly. He didn't have high expectations for its acid damage, but the force of the explosion, as well as the shrapnel, were enough to confuse the golem. 2. Guak. Following that, the second axe exploded. Its outstretched branches were broken apart, and due to the force of the explosion, the golem, or to be more specific, the corrupted dryads which controlled it, screamed awfully. Because it was weakened from the battle of attrition over the last 5 days, it sustained considerable damage from the fully charged melting bone double axes. Shin Woo! We're about to crash into him. We need to get a little closer. The first 2 explosions were nothing more than a guidance system for the last axe to explode as smoothly as possible. Shin Woo had thoroughly analyzed the tree golem's weakness, its center. Its center was where the dryad's wills, as well as the golem's mana, were controlled. At the beginning, the dryads waited in the center of the forest, and when faced with Shin Woo and Jin, created the tree golem, burrowing themselves deep into its chest. That was the tree golem's sole weakness. Alright, now. Ordinarily, the tree golem would always protect its chest, but it panicked due to the 2 continuous explosions, exposing its chest to the sky. That was exactly what Shin Woo was waiting for. Critical hit. The axe flew through the tree and bone pieces, then precisely burrowed into its chest and exploded. Jiga! The dryad's scream was the most shocking and hair-raising scream he'd heard yet. But despite that, it still remained standing. The bark covering the center of the golem was the toughest, as it was its weak spot. The impact removed the bark, but its core was still intact. Indeed, its bark had been removed. Jin! Huat! Shin Woo and Jin hurriedly seized the opportunity that resulted from the 3 continuous explosions, and Jin, who'd gotten close, leapt with all the speed he'd built up. He couldn't have even dreamed of doing so before, but it was possible for him now that he had the steel heart skill. Hup! Shin Woo had aimed his lance at the golem's center ever since Jin started running, without even shaking it once. The outer bark was removed, revealing the black inner flesh as well as the corrupted dryads within. Rising. The drake horn lance's red energy mixed with the bursting thunder dark blue sparks to form a violet light. He wanted to add the twin horn charge to the tip of the lance as well, but he hadn't trained it enough yet. However, this should be enough. Thunder. It was such an embarrassing name that Shin Woo inwardly muttered the technique name and forcefully thrust his lance. The violet sparks rushing towards the tip of the lance was truly magnificent. Cool! At the last moment, the golem twisted its body and attempted to dodge his attack, but Shin Woo had already let go of the lance, and with its explosive speed, burrowed deep within the golem's center before it could even react. Critical hit. Shin Woo planned to explode the lance if that didn't work, but unfortunately, he didn't need to do so. The lance had burrowed deep into the golem's center, and immediately after the electric discharge, as well as a reverberating scream, the golem just stopped. Is it over? It's a pain, so don't try to revive it. Jin muttered, and Shin Woo scolded him. Immediately after, the golem turned into mana particles, dispersing everywhere, and completely disappeared. At the same time, Shin Woo, who was free-falling with Jin, got a message informing them of their victory. You fought against a high-leveled foe, and after tirelessly enduring for several days, achieved the feat of finding its weakness and taking advantage of it. All stats have increased by 3. Proficiency in the Bursting Thunder skill has increased. You have acquired the Adventurer's Karma token. Agility and health have increased by 5. It is absorbed by the Joker Karma. Oh, it had been quite a long time since he'd acquired a new Karma. It seemed like enduring for several days against a high-leveled elite monster were points in his favor. Maybe he might get something even better if he were to endure for even longer. While thinking that Jin would pale in fear if he told him about this, they landed. The Parium and loot from the corrupted tree golem fell from the sky. You have acquired 395,070 Parium. You have acquired a LV5 Dryad's Bow. Through bone reinforcement, it has changed into the LV4 Unchanging Bone Bow, plus 5. You have acquired a Spirit Stone containing the corrupted power of the Dryads. You have acquired an Unmelting Bone Root. Kek, ooh. Shin Woo had been having a lot of success with bone reinforcement lately, but when the level 5 artifact was degraded into a level 4 artifact, he felt truly thrilled. Now that he thought about it, it wouldn't always change for the better. On the other hand, the Spirit Stone containing the Dryad's power was radiating a murky, rusty color, perhaps due to being corrupted, and was simply a mass of mana that even bone reinforcement couldn't do anything about. He didn't really know what to do with this, and decided to put it into his inventory for now. And the final piece of loot, the Unmelting Bone Root, looked like an item that seemed better geared towards acid than the other melting bone roots he'd gotten from the other acid great trees. Whenever he absorbed a melting bone root, he was inwardly disappointed as they would increase his acid element rather than his acid resistance, but this. Nice. Bone reinforcement. Shin Woo had a strong feeling about this and used bone reinforcement without delay. Contrary to its title, the unmelting bone root possessed a powerful mana and acid element within that was transferred in its entirety to Shin Woo. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming the unmelting bone root. Health and magic have increased by 10. Absorbing a portion of the corrupted tree golem's experiences and memories. The high physical strength of these trees that made up this forest, as well as their powerful mana, as well as the intermediate acid resistance skill, has become LV10 and has evolved into the high rank level. Magic has increased by 20. You take almost no damage from acid. You have achieved the feat of acquiring a high rank skill. All stats have increased by 10. He didn't even really need to check his messages. The moment he felt a definite change on the inside, albeit a small one, Shin Woo smiled. That impression. He had achieved his primary objective of coming to this forest. Chapter 21. Inherited Hope. Now, shall we go find out what the dryads were hiding? You know, I don't hate that part of you. That fickle side of yours. Thanks. I like that part of myself too. The moment Shin Woo fulfilled his objective of raising his acid resistance to the high rank level, which was something he seemed willing to stake his life on before, he decided on a new goal. He spent only 3 minutes at best reveling in his accomplishment. I wonder what the dryads wanted from the spirit general? They wanted us to tell her about this place, so the answer's probably inside somewhere. It's easy to find, too. Shin Woo began searching and quickly found the secret the dryads had left behind. In other words, the entrance to a dungeon. Even though he was watching Shin Woo's every move, Jin didn't understand why Shin Woo was so sure. The traces the golem left behind are too thick, so I can't really tell. But it's a lot easier to sense than the winery? If you can grasp the dryad's mana, then it should be easy to find. There was an even easier way. Find the ground that wasn't very damaged, despite the fierce battle. Shin Woo suddenly drew his mana at the place the golem was guarded. With just that, the ground softly vibrated and dirt stairs appeared leading down. Level 5 Dungeon. You have acquired the permit for Melonia's laboratory. All stats increase by 10 within the dungeon. The dungeon's information is added to your minimap. All actions are buffed within the dungeon. There was no way of knowing who Melonia was, but he was sure that the dryads were using this facility differently than the way it was intended upon creation. Because the entrance was so tiny, they, especially the large Jin, had to hunch their shoulders to enter the dungeon. Soon, the entrance closed, and hundreds of stairs appeared. It was a relief that it was wide enough for Jin to go down. We'll reach the bottom soon. It's too quiet. No, there's breathing. You can tell if you sense the mana. The moment Shin Woo spoke decisively, he felt something recoiling in fear from within the darkness of the dungeon. He chuckled and stepped onto the floor at the end of the stairs. However, before they went deeper into the darkness, they heard a voice which caused them to stop. Who are you? It was a pure and young lady's voice. It was different from a human's voice, as it had a peculiar echo to it, and contained magic in it as well. Shin Woo suddenly realized that this was an uncorrupted dryad's voice. As expected, the thing that the corrupted dryads wanted to protect the most above all were the dryads who weren't corrupted. That was the moment that their hidden treasure was revealed. It was obvious when he thought about it. The corrupted dryad's appearance had been so shocking that Shin Woo had erroneously assumed that there weren't any normal dryads left. If that's the case, then what the corrupted dryads wanted from the spirit general was probably. When he acquired the final puzzle piece, the dryads, the answer became quite obvious. They were probably hoping that the spirit general would protect the remaining dryads that hadn't been corrupted. Giving him the key fragment that allows passage to the spirit springs was also likely an extension of that as well. They probably wanted the uncorrupted dryads to leave this dangerous world and live in the spirit springs instead, or something similar. Though Shin Woo got in the middle of it and made everything a mess. All right, Shin Woo. Calm down. If I can talk to them, then I have to give it a try. Just blindly killing them all was the dumbest idea ever. There was probably something else he could get from this scarce spirit species. If that's the case, then there was only one thing of importance: acting. I'm Paul Zero. For Shin Woo, switching to acting was easier than even breathing. He spoke in an extremely peaceful and attentive voice. I'd like to talk with you. Talk. Yeah, talk. Shin Woo's voice was extremely calm. The representative dryad seemed to be confused, as Shin Woo's appearance didn't match that of a high-ranking skeleton at all. However, while hesitating, the other dryads began to speak by the ones or twos. A trespasser. It's a trespasser. How can a skeleton? How can a mere skeleton be talking with us? The dryad's young, beautiful voices were pleasant to his ear, but it felt like the voices that came after the first were a bit older. Soon, the noise spread uncontrollably. You idiot, don't you feel that overflowing elemental power? He's not a normal skeleton. Now that you mention it, you're right. Is he an elementalist? A skeleton's an elementalist? The commotion was gradually increasing. The once dark dungeon began brightening up, allowing him to see within. They were spirits that looked like beautiful women of various ages. He saw both these dryads, as well as the trees that they were protecting. It's rotting. Shin Woo muttered subconsciously, and one of the dryads couldn't help but respond. That meant he'd hit the mark. The trees within the dungeon were rotting. Naturally, that meant that those withering trees were having an effect on the dryads as well. Kook. Shin Woo, who'd noticed the withered trees, looked inside the premises, and found several dryads who looked quite old. They could feel his blazing goblin fire, and they shrank at his seemingly piercing gaze. Immediately after, they became angry. What have you come for? Skeleton. You're not much better off than we are. She's right. You've come to laugh at us, haven't you? Even though you're a skeleton with power over nature, you're still a skeleton. The dryads' voices of resentment increased. The youngest-looking dryad, in other words, the one that seemed least corrupted, sported a fierce expression and stepped forward. This was the dryad who had first yelled, "Who are you? We don't want to talk with you. If you have any kind of respect, then leave before you spread the curse onto us." Ha! Of course, Shin Woo had no intention of powerlessly leaving after finding the dungeon, as well as discovering the mystery. He had two choices: either kill all of them, or fool all of them. Fortunately for them, Shin Woo had decided upon the latter. Now then, it was time to start in earnest. Shin Woo's goblin fire blazed immensely. It seems like you've been infected by the curse since a long time ago. No, you guys weren't born in the dungeon, were you? Weren't you originally affected by the curse? Kook! Shin Woo painted a perfect picture in his head. The dryads had realized the severity of the curse which uprooted the empire, and had pushed their uninfected kin and trees into the dungeon. But the problem was with the trees. Because the tree seeds were corrupted, the dryads inside the dungeon couldn't avoid being cursed. They were able to prevent themselves from becoming like the dryads on the outside, as they entered the dungeon before it was too late, but they would eventually become just like them. How is it? My assessment is spot on, right? Kook. The dryads couldn't object. Though it wasn't 100% accurate, they couldn't disagree that the resulting situation was as he said. Seeing that, Shin Woo sported a satisfied expression while Jin looked at him speechless. Then, at that moment, Shin Woo, who had shut all the dryads up, spoke, as if he were giving them medicine. I'll help you. That's why we came. What? Shin Woo lied through his teeth, and the dryads sported vacant expressions. The youngest dryad acted as their representative and asked, her tone urgent. How? Why? Considering how you're already asking how must mean it's quite urgent. Coo. The sight of the angry, beautiful girl stamping her feet on the ground was cute. So this is what it felt like to make fun of a little kid. However, Jin hit Shin Woo's back with his head, so Shin Woo decided to just go on to the main point. Honestly, it was something he started thinking about once seeing the withered trees. I know a place filled with living trees. Also, it's a lot safer than this place. I'll take you there. At that moment, the dryads were seized with both shock and terror. The dryad was so shocked that she left her mouth open. Of course, that wasn't any different with the other dryads. A place with living trees in this empire filled with the curse. The dryads froze, as if they couldn't understand what he was saying, yet soon thawed out. No, they were actually seething. Trees. Living trees. Filled to the brim. What kind of trees are they? How many? It seemed as though they couldn't just leave it to one representative anymore as the dryads all began to speak. This was the kind of response he expected from spirits that lived together with trees. With one glance, Shin Woo could tell their minds were elsewhere, and he ended up just laughing. They're grapevines. There are hundreds of them. Grapevines. We're really thankful. If we look over these grapevines, they can thrive. I want to see living trees. It's too difficult for these children to endure for much longer. He'd never heard of dryads tending to grapevines before, so Shin Woo had been somewhat doubtful, but their response was quite nice. It was likely because their situation was just that bad. You're thinking of taking them there? To the underground orchard? Yeah. It's a safe and healthy place. There was no way it wouldn't be healthy, as an elf had been tending to it just a short while ago. Though he'd taken most of the grapes, if the dryads were to tend to the orchard, the grapevines should grow well and survive. Of course, it was for security reasons as well. Take us there. Take me there. Please, skeleton. When I felt your power over nature, I knew you were a good person. A good skeleton. Several dryads suddenly changed their attitude towards him and latched onto Shin Woo. Even 5-year-old children wouldn't be so honest with their desires. I'll do whatever you want if you bring me there. What do you want me to do? Should I bear your child? Ah, you're a skeleton. What would make a skeleton happy? Hurry. Tell us what you want. Shin Woo had been preparing all sorts of lies in order to fool them, yet the dryads acted as though they would offer him anything. Seeing that, Shin Woo felt a bit skeptical. But then, so you just came to find us and help us? That's too suspicious. What's your goal here? And how did you find us? There was actually someone who still didn't trust him. It was none other than the representative dryad. Was her mind still clear because she wasn't corrupted at all? It was such an obvious response that Shin Woo actually felt happy. It was a relief that he was able to use the lines that he'd prepared for this very moment. He unhesitatingly and firmly spoke in an honest tone. I met the dryads on the outside that were too corrupted to be saved. They gave me a request. To help you guys before you became like them. That's. Shin Woo was even twisting around their request to the spirit general, Dana von Etleber, however he wished. When he took out the spirit spring key fragment and showed it to her, the suspicious dryad shed a tear. No matter how suspicious she was still a kid. Our mothers made that request for us. You've done well. Kuuk, you. Don't cry, Sinia. Don't cry. The dryad, it seemed like her name was Sinia, began to cry, and the other dryads approached her and hugged her tightly. It was such a touching scene that Shin Woo applauded, and Jin, like always, came over and rammed into his back. They were still connected through assimilation. What are you thinking? They're just like the Pauls. Wouldn't it become interesting if I add another variable? It'd be a much more fun result than killing them at least. Shin Woo replied unimportantly, and Jin had nothing else to say. Only Jin could hear Shin Woo chuckling like a joker. How about it? Should we go look for other spirits too? Jin couldn't offer up any suggestions. He had no idea what sort of chaos Shin Woo would stir up if he found more spirits. All right. So everyone's accepting my offer, right? Yeah. Of course. Thanks, skeleton. No. Paul Zero. Thanks a lot. You're our savior. And so, Shin Woo had ended up saving the dryads in the spirit general's stead. He didn't even know where she was. To them, this was the best method. However, the dryads would someday regret their choice. The fact that they hadn't asked the price for their salvation. But we'll be exposed to the curse on the way there. What do we do about that? Even if we travel as quickly as possible, we'll still be affected by the curse. I'm concerned that we might spread the curse to the healthy trees. Though the concerned dryads had been convinced to move by Shin Woo, they weren't stupid. Ultimately, they asked something that had to be addressed. However, Shin Woo was sporting a relaxed expression. Don't worry. It's not perfect, but I have something in mind. Really? As expected of Zero Paul. So, what's that method? So that's... Shin Woo momentarily turned his attention to Jin. Jin, who had been observing how the situation was progressing, panicked and retreated. What are you trying to do? No. I was just thinking that you could absorb the curse from them with your ability. That's right. The reason Shin Woo thought it'll all work out somehow was because he trusted Jin. And Jin also had a rough idea why. Like when we restored the sanity of that corrupted dryad? Also, they're in much better shape than the corrupted dryads. Can you do it? Jin was anguished. After all, at the end of the day, his curse absorption ability was a byproduct of his resistance, not the main facet. He couldn't intentionally control his absorption ability. It wasn't easy to tell whether or not it would be possible. Even if it is possible, I can't do it by myself. I need your help. I suppose it can't be helped. Of course, he roughly expected him to say something like that. Shin Woo chuckled, approached Jin, gripped his back with one hand, and activated his assimilation skill. Now they could extremely naturally tie both their consciousness and mana together. How is it, Shin Woo? Good. I can roughly tell how it works. Really? Jin himself hadn't even figured out how his ability worked, so how did Shin Woo figure it out? He suddenly felt frustrated, but that's what it meant to be talented, so there was nothing he could do. Shin Woo more deeply analyzed the curse absorption ability, which couldn't be considered a status or even a skill, and added, yeah. Since it's an ability that absorbs the curse, it probably wouldn't have any effect on those who have already become undead, but it should be able to absorb the curse from these spirits. That's amazing. This ability is impressive. It'd be hard for me to replace the absorbed curse energy with life force, but maybe if I were to apply it in a different way. Shin Woo, you're not forgetting what you're supposed to be doing, are you? It can't be helped. Jin's curse absorption ability was such an innovative ability that it made Shin Woo wonder why he hadn't seriously looked into it before. Perhaps that ability would have a positive effect on Shin Woo, as he could freely transform mana however he wished. I'll look into it more in depth later, but for now. Shin Woo was now sure that it would work, and stretched his hand towards the closest dryad. Could you come over here? Sure. The dryad obeyed doubtlessly. While the other dryads nervously watched her, Shin Woo stretched out a hand while keeping the other on Jin's back. Take care of me. The dryad firmly grabbed his outstretched hand without question. Though the spirit's body possessed a different composition, the sensation she conveyed from touching him felt the same as any other living being. Her hand felt extremely soft, and he felt a refreshing energy coming from somewhere. He grabbed the dryad's hand and Shin Woo suddenly felt sad. Damn it. If I were a human, I would have. Hey, your thoughts are leaking out. When Jin pointed that out, Shin Woo became docile, and earnestly began absorbing the curse from the dryad. The curse had burrowed deep into the dryad's body, so it wasn't easy to find at first, but because Shin Woo was tenacious and in control of Jin's ability, he was able to gradually, very gradually draw out the curse. Oh, what's wrong? What's going on? The dryad was momentarily surprised and shouted, so the other dryads yelled in shock. The dryad kept holding Shin Woo's hand and yelled exuberantly. The curse within me is being drawn out. How? It seems like he has an ability that lets him draw out the curse. Is that why Paul Zero is different from the other skeletons? I thought it was strange ever since feeling his power over nature. The Dryad's opinions were quite intelligent. Shin Woo let their lively voices stay in the background and focused on sucking out the undead curse. She wasn't very corrupted anyway, so Shin Woo quickly pulled out the root of the issue. Wow! Wow! The Dryad, feeling the curse that had caused her heart so much discomfort leave her body completely, touched her body all over while slack-jawed. Was it just him? She looked a bit younger too. The curse is gone. It's true. The curse is really gone. Thanks Paul Zero. While the Dryads made a huge fuss, the cured Dryad stroked Shin Woo's head while holding onto him tightly. He felt her soft skin all over his body, yet his heart felt calm, like an ocean without a single wave. You're my savior. I get it. So could you stop stroking my head? Now, you've seen how it works, so next. I think I can do several at once. Wah! Me first, me first. As soon as Shin Woo gave the signal, the Dryads cheered and rushed towards him, as if they were waiting for that. Shin Woo and Jin were suddenly buried in spirits. You must love it, huh? You already know that I don't really like it. It was such a relief that he was a skeleton that didn't need to breathe in times like this. Shin Woo calmly began to suck out the curse from the Dryads everywhere and send it over to Jin. Jin possessed the ability to absorb the curse, not Shin Woo, so Shin Woo would just act as the passageway that gathered the curse. Because of that, the amount of times Jin could revive through the blessing of death suddenly increased. I feel free. Me too. Ah. I was freed, but the trees weren't, so I feel so sorry for them. It didn't take much time before all of the Dryads in the clearing were cleansed of the curse. They cheered, and even clapped, but also mourned for the trees that couldn't be saved, as they were already dead. Shin Woo removed his hand from Jin's back and clapped his hands. Don't separate yourselves from me even when you get outside. Remember that. Yes. We'll stick to you like glue. Their responses were reliable. Shin Woo felt like he had become a teacher leading kindergarten students around. Good. Then shall we go? Before that, Paul Zero. The Dryad's representative, Sinia, who looked the youngest amongst the living Dryads and wasn't corrupted at all, as well as seemingly being the highest-ranked Dryad here, opened her mouth. We don't need them, but there are things inside that other people might need. You see, the belongings of the original owner of this dungeon are still there. Ah, now that you mention it. Obviously, the Dryads hadn't made this dungeon. Shin Woo had decided to put off thinking about the message he'd seen when he entered the dungeon, as it seemed like this Melonia figure made this dungeon so that spirits could live in it as they pleased. But after listening to Sinia, it seemed as though Melonia's belongings were still inside this dungeon. It was unexpected news for him as he had been so focused on the Dryads that he had completely forgotten about the dungeon itself. We thought you might want them, so we brought them. How about it? Sinia's green eyes brightened. If someone couldn't tell that she was a Dryad from her green eyes, then her hair was also a light green as well, and Shin Woo turned his attention to the loot she'd put on the floor. There were a few gems and gold nuggets, earrings enveloped in a cold magic, and finally, books that Melonia seemed to have personally wrote. Sinia watched as Shin Woo examined the loot. She must be checking to see if he liked her present. Shin Woo was indeed satisfied and replied, "Thanks. They're exactly what I wanted. That's a relief. Ooh. Skeletons like the same stuff humans do." Sinia smiled in relief and simultaneously, the Dryads behind her cheered. Honestly, he didn't need gold or gems, or even earrings, as he didn't have ears to put them on, so half of the presents were meaningless to him. However, acting as though he loved the presents was an important step in solidifying a good relationship with them. Even now, Shin Woo was still acting. However, her handwritten books might be useful later, though the use would differ based on what she did as a human. Shin Woo carefully placed the precious metals, the pile of books, and the earrings into his inventory. However, the moment his hand touched the earrings, they transformed unexpectedly. The LV6 Silver Ice Tiger's Cold Whisker Earrings has been modified through bone reinforcement. You have acquired the LV6 Silver Ice Tiger's canine tooth. Damn it. He only briefly touched the chilling, hair-raising earrings, yet their original shape disappeared in an instant, and in their place was only a tiny silver tooth. It was ridiculously light, and the tooth was so cold that it felt like it would freeze the air. Shin Woo was dumbstruck. The earrings were changed by my skill, but the form completely changed this time. Whiskers can change into teeth? He knew there was nothing more stupid than questioning how bone reinforcement changed the material of something, but even so, he couldn't help but be surprised. When a piece of equipment changed in the past, it would change into another piece of equipment. But this time, an accessory was changed into bone, through bone reinforcement, so how could he not be surprised? What's that? It seemed like she was equally surprised, as Cinia questioned Shin Woo. Shin Woo pondered for a moment, but decided to ask her honestly. It seems like it's a silver ice tiger's tooth, but do you know what a silver ice tiger is? A silver ice tiger is a spirit. A silver ice tiger. They were still alive? You idiot. They're all dead. That's why there's only a tooth of them left. A spirit. Shin Woo was wondering, so he asked Cinia. Was the dungeon's original owner an elementalist? Yep. As I thought, fellow elementalists can tell each other apart. She was friendly with dryads. She let us use this space, even when she was dying. Shin Woo decided to reflect on his previous thoughts of them occupying the dungeon without permission. To think they'd been allowed in here. Do you guys contract with elementalists too? No? Spirits only form contracts with elementalists when they need mana. So basically, only the aggressive spirits form contracts. We just need trees. He didn't understand what she was saying in the least, but he could at least understand that not all spirits form contracts with elementalists. Perhaps the books he'd recently acquired would explain that. Shin Woo was satisfied that he had unexpectedly procured knowledge regarding a field he knew little about. He was indeed satisfied, but bones were different. Bone reinforcement. Shin Woo soon reinforced himself with the ice tiger's canine, as the dryads watched with great interest with their brightening eyes. The best way of knowing more about this bone was to absorb it. Executing bone reinforcement by consuming a silver ice tiger's canine. Strength and magic have increased by 8. You have acquired a basic knowledge of spirits. You have learned intermediate ice LV1. Shin Woo thought he'd be able to acquire the ice element sometime soon, as he possessed the elemental reversal ability, and because of that, he wasn't very surprised or happy about it. What he was surprised about was the vast basic knowledge on spirits. This is more like the elementalist Melonia's memories than the silver ice tigers. This clear knowledge regarding spirits or elemental techniques was like a welcome rain for him. So much so that he felt that he could have been an elementalist had the curse not befallen the Empire, causing everything to die. The canine is gone. No, Paul Zero absorbed it. How strange. I feel more elemental power coming from Paul Zero. How's that possible? Can he use ice spirits as well? The dryads were in awe. They adamantly believed that Shin Woo was an elementalist. I'm done with the silver ice tiger, so let's go. Okay. I'm excited. That's how the mass migration of spirits and skeleton began. Anything involving Shin Woo was always like this. If another hero saw this, they wouldn't believe their eyes. We're finally outside. Keck. Look at that mist. It was formed from the curse clumping together. The outside world has gotten worse. If you feel like you can't handle it, you have to get close and grab onto Paul Zero immediately. We can't even find traces of our mothers anymore. The dryads seemed elated at first when they got outside, but they soon became depressed upon realizing how appalling the situation was, as the underground empire was covered in the curse. Even though the forest was a lot cleaner than the other areas, as undead couldn't trespass deep into the forest. Ew, this wasn't the world I was looking forward to. It's so unfortunate. You can't call it a world when all the living beings are dead. Is there nothing we can do for this world? Paul Zero, let's hurry up and go. Cinia spoke as the representative of the drooping dryads. It was difficult to even say anything right now, so Shin Woo silently nodded his head. Yeah. Follow me quickly. Okay. I want to hurry and see living trees. Me too. They ran silently. As dryads couldn't live without trees, the strength they could exert was diminished, yet they were able to follow behind Jin, who ran at full speed. He was thinking about whether he needed to slow down or not, but both Shin Woo and Jin were shocked. This horse is really fast. I didn't think it'd be able to run as fast as a spirit. Even depressed, they marveled at Jin's speed. Jin didn't show it, but it seemed like he was a bit happy. Some spirits found the conversation about Jin's speed as their opportunity to speak, and after one or two of them began speaking, they changed the subject of their conversation to Shin Woo. Why is Paul Zero special? What did you do before you died? I was just a wandering knight. You're an elementalist too, right? Right? Actually, I'm not an elementalist. That's impossible. Shin Woo explained himself to the dryads using the Paul Zero profile he'd set up. They were in disbelief and shock when he explained that he could use the elements themselves, but they eventually came to this conclusion. Is Paul Zero actually a spirit? A skeleton spirit. How cool! I knew he didn't feel like a stranger. Because it was gradually becoming troublesome to reply, he decided to let them think what they wanted. He would have preferred if some undead monster appeared, but because he was moving with a force of level 5 dryads, it seemed like the undead instinctively sensed the danger and avoided them. How many hours had they run? When they were close to the vineyard, Shin Woo performed a final check on the dryads for the curse, since it would be best if they were completely clean before entering. If you feel uneasy from the curse, come over here. Okay. Excuse me. Sinia, who hadn't been corrupted thus far, seemed like she wasn't immune to the curse once coming outside, and as soon as she heard Shin Woo, immediately approached him. But when he actually checked Sinia's condition, he couldn't help but be surprised. You seem pretty clean to me. Really? That's a relief. As expected, was Sinia special amongst her people? Shin Woo thought, as he completely sucked out what little curse she was afflicted with. Perhaps Sinia knew what he was thinking about. She tightly gripped his hand and just gazed into Shin Woo's skeletal face. We're here. This is it? I don't feel anything though. You idiot. There's no way living trees would be above ground. Oh, I see. Shin Woo arrived at the exit that he and Arian had used to leave the vineyard. It was quite far from the winery. Here. Ooh. It was a dungeon. With a bit of control, Shin Woo opened the dungeon's entrance. The dryads cheered and scrambled to get inside the dungeon. As more than 300 dryads entered instantaneously, Sinia turned around to look at Shin Woo and tilted her head. Paul Zero, you're not going in? I'll go in after setting up the safety device. Okay, thanks. As soon as all the dryads went into the dungeon, Shin Woo crouched down and tinkered with the entrance. The threads of mana that came from his hand cut off the branches, and Jin asked, What are you doing? Nothing much. I'm just trying to copy the winery's safety device. You can do that? Why not? Jin's expression became dazed. Though Shin Woo went beyond his expectations all the time, he felt as though Shin Woo had gone to a place he couldn't even begin to comprehend after undergoing various experiences with him. You said you didn't know how to use magic. It's simple once you learn the trick to it. You can't even call this magic. It's more like intuition. Jin had his own hunch the moment he heard that. The intuition Shin Woo was talking about was definitely different from the intuition he knew about. I'm finished. Now most people won't be able to harm the spirits inside. Good, let's go inside. I have no idea what you did to finish up, though. As soon as Shin Woo and Jin entered, the entrance softly shut and was camouflaged with the surrounding landscape. It would be impossible to discover it unless someone like the 12 generals was involved. Even Shin Woo wasn't aware of it, but his mana abilities were growing at a considerably fast rate. Wow! They're really grapevines. It's filled with trees. It's overflowing with life. By the time they went down, the spirits had already sensed overflowing life energy and found the orchard filled to the brim with grapevines. The two sources of such refreshing energy met, permeating the room with brightness. To be more specific, the Dryad's voices prickled his ears, to the point that it was unbearable. They're really alive. Ah, there really were living trees left. The girls, upon discovering the lines of trees emitting such vigorous energy within the vast, underground orchard, each cradled one of the trees and expressed joy with their entire bodies. The grapevines selected by these Dryads emitted an even greater vigor than before. These children are so healthy. How could they be so pure again when they were dirtied by human hands? This is an elf. It's an elf. As expected, these Dryads, as tree specialists, quickly figured out what had happened to these trees. Then, upon discovering Shin Woo, who had just come down, the Dryads latched onto him and asked, "Paul Zero, were you an elf before you died? I had that feeling about you." "Nope, this place was already like this by the time I found it." "I see. There might be an elf still living in the Empire. I want to meet that elf." But that elf wasn't born in the Empire. Shin Woo smiled bitterly and approached them. He was trying to suck out any remaining curse within them just in case. The Dryads obediently allowed Shin Woo to do so, and eventually, he purified them completely. "Now we're finished. We're all done? Yeah. You guys can just keep living here now." Ah. Shin Woo had safely moved them to their new home, and just like he promised, had provided them with living trees. He'd also blocked off the entrance so that not just anyone could enter, and had absorbed the curse from them in its entirety, so they were planning on doing whatever he wished in return. "Thank you so much for helping us, Paul Zero. But we don't know what we can do for you. We could have been a lot more helpful back when there was much more of our kind." This was after Shin Woo had explained to them just what he did outside, while lying about a considerable number of things. His, seemingly, noble intent of purifying the Empire and destroying the undead had impressed them. Only Jin gazed at him as if he were a swindler, but that didn't concern him. Paul Zero. Then, Sinia stepped forward. She had picked the toughest and most vigorous grapevine as her own, and perhaps because of that, the grapevine was already starting to emit a brilliant energy. "You're our savior. We can never fully repay you for that, but we want to repay you in any way possible. We must." They would probably look favorably upon him if he said that he didn't do it seeking a reward, but Shin Woo didn't respond like that. Because if he lied too much, then there was a chance that the Dryads would get suspicious of him. "To be honest, there is something I wanted from you. Just tell us. We'll do anything in our power to help you." Sinia was actually happy that he told her he wanted something from them. They truly were gullible, as it seemed like they would be fooled by anyone. But even now, Shin Woo couldn't complain as he was fooling them while receiving high praise. "I told you that I was trying to purify the Empire, right? Yeah. To be honest, I think it'll be difficult. There are people who are helping me. They're fighting someplace else right now. Some of them are undead, and some of them aren't." They already had Shin Woo as an example, so they weren't surprised. Hearing that, Sinia momentarily stood still and slowly nodded her head. "You're saying that there's still hope in this world, like these living trees that have survived in this seemingly dead world?" "Yeah. And I want you guys to be a part of that hope." He wasn't asking something from them, but was asking them to stand alongside him. Sinia murmured to herself. It wasn't an easy decision as the representative of the Dryads. However, just staying here is enough for now. However, there may be a day when I need your help. You just need to help out a bit then. Who? Sinia anguished over it, but could ultimately only respond in one way. Plus, it was something that all the Dryads wanted anyway. I, as well as everyone else, want to purify the Empire. I appreciate you thinking that way. I'm the one who's thankful. Shin Woo stretched his hand out first, and Sinia stiffly grabbed onto it. It was truly a surreal sight. Ah, and now that you mention it. After they finished shaking hands, Shin Woo took a step back. He suddenly remembered something and searched his inventory. He took out a stone radiating a turbid green. It was none other than the spirit stone that contained the power of the Dryads. That's. I know how you feel, but just wait a sec. When he'd first acquired it, he thought he wouldn't be able to do anything to it, but now that he could suck out the curse with Jin's ability, it was a different story. As soon as Shin Woo glanced at Jin, he shrugged his shoulders and nodded his head. Does that contain our mother's strength? Look. The lights gradually becoming clearer. It might have been difficult for Shin Woo and Jin had the spirit stone been an ordinary item, but because it was an item that contained the power of spirits they'd encountered already, it was much easier than normal to suck out the swirling curse within. Wow, blessing of death has increased again. Now I can die 5 times. That's nice. Though the darkness that permeated the spirit stone was quite strong, once he gained momentum, he was able to vigorously draw out the curse. Ultimately, the spirit stone returned to its perfect, clean state in less than a few minutes. Spirit stone holding the power of the dryads. Firstly, the item's explanation changed. The vividly green spirit stone was filled with so much elemental power that it felt like it would explode at any moment. Though it felt like he could absorb it himself, it would be better to give it to the person who could absorb it best, rather than absorb it just to increase his magic a bit. Here, take it. You're giving it to me. Of course. It belongs to your people. Ah. Sinia accepted it with trembling hands. He'd somewhat expected this to happen, but at that moment, the magic within the spirit stone harmonized with Sinia and emitted an explosive light. Shin Woo watched closely as Sinia absorbed the magic from the spirit stone and was reborn. The other dryads also silently approached and watched without saying a word. It seemed like they knew what exactly she was going through. LV6 Dryad Princess, Sinia. When the spirit stone's light disappeared and Sinia could be seen once again, the spirit stone no longer remained in her hands. But the fact remained that her level and her position had changed, as well as her power. The power she emitted was incomparable to before, proving that the spirit stone hadn't disappeared in vain. Thank you so much, Paul Zero. There wasn't much change in her physique, but she possessed much more mana than before, as well as that mana becoming clearer. As she was composed of mana, her dress became more splendid. He supposed that that was proof that she was a higher level spirit than the others. We will keep our promise to you. Always. Her voice was trembling with effervescence and happiness. He could tell how she was feeling purely through her voice. As expected, these spirits really were messed up. Shin Woo inwardly muttered. Even if we die at the end of it, we will always. No, it'd be pointless if you died, so you don't have to go that far. Sinia declared as she gazed more deeply at Shin Woo, and Shin Woo replied humbly and thought. Everything is going as planned. Paul Zero, you have to come see us again. Huke. 1. Paul Zero, don't leave me. Bye. Paul Zero. When Shin Woo declared that he would leave immediately, the dryads' reactions were quite the sight. There were those who grabbed his hands, and there were those who acted like they were parting with their lover, as tears streamed down their cheeks. Their initial reactions of him being a skeleton and being astonished were non-existent at this point. This is usually what happens. While a first impression seemed like it was of utmost importance, they had ultimately forgotten all about it. I said I'd come back. You have to come back. Since we want to repay you for introducing us to such lovely trees. Yeah. I promise to come see you again. Though he had established his relationship with them through a false name, Shin Woo suddenly thought that perhaps his relationship with the dryads was actually more truthful than his relationship with the heroes he conversed with in the chatting channel. Paul Zero, whenever you need our help, just give us a call. Sinia, as the representative of the dryads, stepped forward, softly embraced Shin Woo, and said her farewells. He softly tapped Sinia's shoulder with his bone hand. Yeah, I'll do that. I promise. Take this, she said, and simultaneously passed Shin Woo a small grapevine branch. As it possessed Sinia's magic, who had been reborn as a dryad princess, he thought it might become the material for an artifact, but fortunately him grabbing the branch didn't transform it into bone. If you break this branch, I'll come to your side, no matter where you are. Thanks. He felt like his lie had worked almost too well, but Shin Woo obediently took the branch. Sinia looked relieved when she saw Shin Woo pocket into his inventory the branch and then kissed his forehead, his frontal bone, and whispered so that only he could hear her. An undead who's not undead, without the energy of death. I hope that one day I can return to you your true appearance that has been hidden by the appearance of a skeleton. Shin Woo was slightly surprised, but his reply didn't really give that away. It seemed like his silence was enough for her, as Sinia smiled softly and stepped back. She had instantly gained a commanding appearance upon absorbing the spirit stone and being reborn as a dryad princess. Good for you. Ah, knock it off. Jin was jealous that Shin Woo monopolized all of the dryad's attention and left the orchard whilst inwardly quarreling with him. Of course, they weren't going above ground immediately. They were using the railway to travel to the winery and leave through that exit instead. And by doing so, Shin Woo wouldn't have to worry about the dryads for some time. They had everything they would need underground already, so as long as nobody disturbed them, they should be able to stockpile energy and grow from within. Moreover, their leader, Princess Sinia, had promised to aid him unconditionally, so he couldn't ask for a better result. If he was a human, he probably would have sighed refreshingly right now, but it was quite unfortunate that he couldn't. In any case, we're finished with this. When I'm with you, everything becomes so hectic that I can't even remember what we were originally trying to do. Jin pointed out, and that resonated with Shin Woo a bit. When he thought about it, he hadn't originally set out to save the dryads. He'd just gone to the forest using the knowledge of Vita's troops to level up his acid resistance. However, even when he thought about it himself, he couldn't really give a good reason as to how the situation had become like this. He could only say that he had acted according to his instincts, and this was the result that followed. But you were able to rest a little because of the dryads, as we've been fighting all this time. Plus, you were able to see some beautiful women too. If this constitutes taking a break, then how much do we have to move around for it to be called hectic? Besides, all those beautiful women were flirting with you. Ha. It seemed like Jin had accumulated a lot of stress from acting like a normal horse in front of the dryads. Moreover, they had spent almost 2 months training their acid resistance skills, so they had managed to escape the throes of death. Maybe he'd achieved the feat of being the first undead that died from overworking himself. I got it. You used your curse absorption on them, and you've been working really hard lately, so let's take our time for now. That's not what I wanted to say, but you said it, not me, so no take-backs. All right. We won't do anything regarding resistances or dungeons for now. Jin sounded quite satisfied. However, as soon as Shin Woo relayed his next destination to Jin through assimilation, he soon uttered in a stiff voice. Hey! This is where that senior who turned into an undead is. Yep. Shin Woo's destination was an area that was somewhere between a danger level 2 zone and a danger level 3 zone. It was also the location where Shino Rendu had died and been reborn as an undead. It had been some time since, so he wanted to see if Metafel had left as well. You said we wouldn't do anything regarding resistances or dungeons. While we're taking it slow and sightseeing, I wanted to see how our senior is doing. And hunting him. Why do you have to say it like that? I just want to inherit my senior's will. If I can, his abilities as well. You cruel bastard. Though Shin Woo responded sarcastically, he didn't actually feel all too good about this. There was no way he could be happy about fighting against his undead-turned-senior when he had never treated him badly. Although he was both a swindler and an actor, he wasn't a psychopath. Even so, it's not something I can avoid. And it's not something I should avoid. Especially because it was highly likely that Shino Rendu had encountered the mercenary king, Metafel, in his final moments. If those memories are intact, he had to acquire them no matter what. He didn't have time to waste on pointless affection. You'll go, right? Fine. You asshole. I wasn't joking when I said we should go slowly. You don't need to go full speed. What's the occasion? Jin inclined his head, looking for the direction the sun rose, even though no such sun existed in the underground empire. Seeing that, Shin Woo just shrugged his shoulders. Since we've been growing too rapidly thus far, We need the time to examine and get used to our abilities. That really doesn't sound like something you would say. Even though Jin snorted in astonishment, he did as Shin Woo said and began moving slowly. Though he was still moving so quickly that others couldn't even see him, this speed was walking slowly for Jin. Good. Right now my abilities are. Shin Woo had become comfortable on Jin's back, as if it were the living room of his house, and examined both his stats and skills. Thus far, he'd encountered similar enemies and fought similar battles in the Forest of the Dryads, and had concentrated on using his skills. If he didn't meditate over his skills and adapt to them at times like this, he might destroy himself, too, from using those skills over and over again. I'll forget about acid resistance for a while. The same goes for the acid element as well. However, the method I figured out at the end of my training wasn't bad. Since he was thinking about it, he decided to summon some weapons into the air. If he excluded the armor set he was wearing right now, he could summon 4 pieces of equipment. All of the summoned weapons were the lightning tooth. When he fought in the Forest of the Dryads, the axe was the most appropriate weapon as it was of the acid element, but in normal situations, the lightning tooth was the best, as it emitted powerful lightning. On the other hand, the Drake Horn Lance was obviously an impressive weapon, but it bothered him that it didn't possess its own element. You're not going to throw those somewhere, are you? Don't worry. Just look forward. Magic. The mysterious energy that inhabited all existence. It could possess an infinite number of properties depending on the wielder. However, one such property of magic was that those properties couldn't be maintained for very long when magic is poured into something from the outside. However, that rule isn't applied to my bones, which are both my equipment as well as my body. To be more exact, Shin Woo made it so that rule didn't apply. It sounded easy, but it required a substantial amount of willpower as well as concentration. As he split his magic into 4 different streams and inserted that mana into his weapons, he absorbed the outside surrounding mana within him, replenishing his magic. It wasn't easy, but if he was able to do this naturally, his combat ability would increase as well. Rather than trying to explode the weapons with the infused mana, I need to become proficient in collecting that mana back and using it. If he did so, his bone armory wouldn't be just a simple storage house, but an extension of his body. And if it did become an extension of his body, Shin Woo could gain power that couldn't be measured strictly through levels. Now that I think about it, my stats are already at a total of 3,093. I only need to raise my stats by 107 to get to level 6. He'd bragged that he could get to level 6 in just a month when he was still level 4, and ever since he'd reached level 5 to now, he'd made the best choice he could in most situations, so it would be strange if Shin Woo hadn't grown by this much. Unfortunately, there was a huge gap between Shin Woo and Jin now. When they had first met, Jin had been a higher level than Shin Woo, but now, there was a difference of about 500 stats between them. Still, at the very least, Jin possessed the Child of Light skill, which increased his agility stat gain by 3 times, so the disparity hadn't grown any larger than this. The number of skills we have are way too different. Jin only had a few skills he could use, Steel Heart being the main one, and concentrated on those few skills, whereas Shin Woo trained the variety of skills he'd gained from bone reinforcement as much as possible. Most low-rank skills wouldn't increase one's stats very much even when they leveled up, but when they reached the intermediate level, even the most lousy-looking skills would increase one's stats by at least 5, so there was no way there wouldn't be a gap between the two. It doesn't seem like Jin can obtain as many skills as me, even if I reinforce him with the same amount of bones as me. It can't be helped. This might be the directions of our respective karmas. There was only a fixed number of bones that Jin could absorb, so there was a difference in the amount of bones the two could absorb. It would probably be better if he gave up on equalizing their stats. Of course, it wasn't like Jin wouldn't be helpful if his level dropped below Shin Woo's. Jin's sprint-related skills, his body designed for running, and above all, the imbalance of his high agility stat with his other stats that resulted in his speed, would certainly increase Shin Woo's strength. Shin Woo. Shin Woo. Yeah? Look over there. Shin Woo, who was thinking far into their future, was awoken by Jin's voice. Because of their connection, Shin Woo immediately knew what Jin was pointing at. It was a city. The amount of death energy being released from the city confirmed that it hadn't been purified by the other heroes. What do you think? Should we stop by? Yeah. I suppose we could stop by and then continue. It should be okay, as it had nothing to do with resistances or dungeons. Shin Woo shrugged his shoulders and followed Jin's offer. Both Shin Woo and Jin were unaware of this, but Jin had been considerably corrupted by Shin Woo. Exactly 3 hours later, they managed to purify the city. Anyone hearing that they'd purified a level 2 danger zone city within 3 hours would be shocked, but unfortunately, the two skeleton heroes had already forgotten what it meant to be normal. You have perfectly purified the intermediate city, Buot, where countless merchants from small towns gathered. You have acquired 2 permits to God's secret shop. You have acquired 100,000 perium. Proficiency in all combat-related skills increase. The Finding Friend location function has been added. If your comrade permits you to do so, you can track their location. You defeated every undead in the city with a single blow. You are powerful enough to be called the most powerful level 5, as you easily overpowered similarly leveled undead. All stats have increased by 3. Shin Woo had experience in clearing the similarly sized city, Kahabi, so he didn't even need to worry about conquering this city, and just slaughtered every undead that came his way. But perhaps because of that, he achieved another feat and his stats increased. Well, he'd repeatedly killed level 5 elite undead in a single blow, which couldn't be common within the ranks of level 5 heroes. Even if Shin Woo was right about to level up to level 6, that is. So that's how it is. The strongest level 5. Shin Woo felt like that title was exposing his location, so he wasn't all that happy about it. No matter how much he boasted, he was still only the strongest amongst level 5s. However, he quickly regained his spirits. Someone might pick a fight with him if he were self-conceited or became too relaxed. It was always important to strive to improve oneself. Even his own parents had told him that. So what did your parents do for a living? What's with you all of a sudden? In the process of conquering the city, he had consumed all of the level 5 elite's bones he'd acquired, but the effects weren't worth writing home about, so while he was here, Shin Woo investigated all of the sewers as well. There was nothing in the sewers this time too. There were some anti-skull hidden facilities remaining, but there was no one inside of them, so he felt twice the dejection. Was he becoming careless after recruiting the golems and dryads as allies? He became angry, even though it didn't really matter. Maybe the guys in here were smarter than the rest and regained their intellect on their own and left. How unfortunate. It's not that unfortunate, you know. Shin Woo left the city gaining essentially nothing and began running towards his destination with Jin once more. A few more hours passed like that. I think I'm done with this now. After he'd infused mana into the weapons, he maintained it, as well as drawing out that mana to use for his skills. In less than 4 hours of training, Shin Woo mastered that technique. At the very least, he wouldn't make a mistake while controlling this few weapons. I'm done checking my stats too. Shin Woo clenched and unclenched his fist a few times, and then nodded his head. He checked his stats, his skills, and even the titles he'd acquired thus far. His self-inspection was perfect. Even if he encountered a level 6 elite monster, he would be able to take it on without any problems. Then, I suppose I should start resting a bit. Of course, it was just called resting, as Shin Woo couldn't waste his time with that. He took a deep breath, opened his inventory, and took out a book from it. It was the book seemingly left behind by the elementalist Melonia, who had an amicable relationship with the dryads. There are a total of 5 volumes. It's sorted by number. He opened the first volume. Though he was given the ability to speak and read this world's language, because he had absorbed countless undead's memories and experiences, he didn't really need to use that ability anymore, and was able to read the letters naturally. Perhaps because of that, he could understand the meaning behind each and every letter. I hope that this book comes into the possession of one who loves spirits. The first volume started with such a cliché and pretentious line, and could be considered an introduction to spirits that was written personally by Melonia. As he read the first volume, Shin Woo was able to supplement his knowledge considerably with the absorbed Silver Ice Tiger's canine. There was a difference between theory and actual experience. He laughed at the fact that he was able to acquire both from Melonia. High-ranked knowledge and experience. It was easy for him to tell that Melonia was someone renowned when she was alive, as she possessed both. But even Melonia is saying that an elementalist can't use elemental power themselves, but instead uses the spirits to acquire it. Based on the experiences he'd acquired from the earring, elemental power just referred to elemental magic. But contrary to Shin Woo, who had realized that he could transform his mana into said elemental power, Melonia stated that one must form a contract with a spirit to do so. Of course, Melonia was wrong. Since Shin Woo was proof that she was wrong. If that's the case, then I don't need to contract with a spirit, as I can already use elemental power. However, it didn't seem like that was actually the case. As Melonia said, spirits are as smart or smarter than humans, so they can also move independently, and the more authority the spirits have over an element, the more powerfully they can wield that element. Above all, they lead their contractor to immortality. As Shin Woo read that section, his goblin fire blazed. It was a phrase that he really didn't like. Since entering the underground empire, the term immortality could cause Shin Woo to shake. Moreover, if one could actually achieve immortality from contracting with spirits, then Melonia shouldn't have died. A spirit causes their contractor to slowly, very slowly become like them. These spirits do not have the physical constraints of an aging body, but are composed of magic and a soul. In theory, they possess eternal life. But as the contractor slowly starts to resemble these spirits, what would happen to them in the end? The contract between a spirit and an elementalist is like the relationship between trees and the dryads who parasitize them. It becomes easy to understand by comparing the elementalist to the tree, and the dryads as the spirits. The moment the dryads attach to these trees which have no ability or will of their own, the trees begin to obtain a certain spiritual power. In the process, the trees become a place where dryads are born, as well as the resting place for the other dryads. Ultimately, the tree becomes a new spirit. One of the reasons I made a research facility in the forest of the dryads is because I wanted to thoroughly observe the tree's changes. It seems like Melonia hadn't come to the forest of the dryads with innocent intentions, contrary to what the dryads had thought. It didn't seem like she spent her days pleasantly researching by strolling through the forest and breathing in the aroma of the forest. She said that she didn't want any harm to come to the dryads, yet she was clearly a researcher who studied the dryads. This is my supposition based on the dryads' relationship with trees. One day, an elementalist contracted with spirits will lose their body and will become a pure astral body. If that's the case, can we even call that an evolution? Can we call that immortality? Shin Woo didn't think so. They wouldn't become a different species regardless of if they had a physical body or an astral body. There would be living organisms with superior physical bodies, as well as living beings with inferior astral bodies. One couldn't conclude whether one was strictly better than the other. And if turning into an astral body was indeed considered a form of evolution, he wouldn't walk that path. Giving up one thing to gain another. He was sick and tired of those kind of deals. He wanted it all now. Who? Shin Woo had already read 3 of the 5 volumes and inwardly sighed. He had attempted to learn a specific method of handling spirits, but the history of spirit theory was extensive, and there was a lot of knowledge and usage of spirits which seemed to be filled with only subjective opinions. Of course, that wasn't bad. It wasn't bad, but it felt like he was licking an extremely delicious and sweet fruit. Or the feeling of figuring out the history of the painting, but not providing the winning bid at an auction. What about the other 2 remaining volumes? The 4th volume's contents were much shabbier than the previous 3 volumes, yet it was the book detailing the method of contracting with spirits. It was the book Shin Woo had been wanting to read the most. Plus, the contents are dry. Volume 1 to 3 had explained spirits quite enthusiastically, Yet when he actually got to the method of contracting with spirits, it was extremely abstract, stating that one must find a place abundant with the energy of nature, which wasn't very helpful and only stated things that were discouraging. Spirits are living beings. Without life, there are no spirits. You must find a place most abundant with life. If one can become a knight through their own efforts, and a magician is heaven sent, then an elementalist is chosen by nature. Personal training isn't really instrumental in becoming an elementalist. An abundance of mana is important, and above all, luck is paramount. That's because one must be chosen by a spirit. An elementalist must try to take after nature. Spirits love the most natural mana. Next, the more captivating you look to the spirits, the better. The first half of the 4th volume evoked the feeling of conquer them. Make the spirits fall for you. The makeup that'll make them fall for you. And the second half sounded like something a guru cultivating himself in a forest would say. The disconnect really bothered him. It's exactly like I thought. What about? It was impossible to contract with spirits in this empire, as the curse had already taken root. That's quite unfortunate. If he went into a dungeon, would spirits be in there? Even if there were, they wouldn't easily form a contract with him. Moreover, he would need a charming exterior appearance. So long as Shin Woo didn't continually maintain his disguise, the clear conditions were impossible. Since he was a skeleton. I already knew it all, but I read it thinking that maybe. Damn it. There's only the last volume remaining, so I should read that. Are you the type that can't stop reading a series even when it goes to shit? Don't traumatize me. After Shin Woo quieted Jin down, he started reading the 5th volume. It was Melonia's journal, and seemed like it was written after she had become an elementalist. The dates were all mixed up, but they were properly arranged by time. His name is Silver. They say all silver ice tigers are like this, but Silver's the only silver ice tiger for me. Silver lead me to a different world. I was able to meet other elementalists as well, and I, who was once a stupid countryside girl, was able to become a royal elementalist and wear nice clothes. Everything feels like a dream. To think she didn't erase this section of her journal, the time when she was so naive. Perhaps this was the last thing Melonia could remember? He felt slightly resistant in reading further, but Shin Woo resolved himself and went to the next page. It seems like I have an aptitude for magic. Since I have an aptitude in magic, and I'm also loved by a spirit, I can become a talented elementalist. I'm not used to getting complimented by others. Someone more talented than me entered. They're only 7 years old, yet they've been chosen by 3 high-ranking spirits. Moreover, she's the royal princess. Is it really okay for someone to have it all? Shin Woo stopped at this part. If they were clearly this powerful, then perhaps Shin Woo would meet them later. But if that were the case, then Shin Woo had to read further. He continued on to the next page without rest, and was able to obtain more information regarding the princess from Melonia. However, Melonia's diary, which detailed her life in the palace, ended abruptly with one sentence. Silver died. After that, what was depicted afterwards was dark. Reviving a spirit, the research involved, leaving the palace, as well as regarding where she disappeared to, the Forest of the Dryads. And, when I had no way out, and had fallen into despair, they found me. They said they would give me all the materials I needed, so I planned to follow them. I knew their resistance, their treachery would end in the worst way possible, but still, it doesn't matter. A world without silver can go to hell for all I care. That page ended with that final line. Ultimately, this was clearly related to his quest of uncovering the secret of the Empire, but not telling him about how things progressed beforehand. Shin Woo sported a discouraged expression and wanted to burn the diary to a crisp, but he suddenly saw something written very small on the last page. Does anyone have the key to Heaven's Gate? At the very least, that is something that doesn't belong to either Auntie Skull or the Emperor. Putting aside the fact that she knew about Auntie Skull, what's with this clearly suspicious line? Shin Woo tilted his head. However, Jin called Shin Woo at just the right time. Shin Woo, we've arrived. When Shin Woo raised his head, he saw a completely ruined city before him. It looked a lot bigger than any other city he'd seen before, but because everything was broken, it felt truly empty. Above all, what was most peculiar was the disorderly traces of undead in various places, yet they had already left the city. As well as the presence of a hero who'd become an undead, that had died alone silently within the city. What are you going to do? What do you mean? Shin Woo shoved the 5 volumes of Melonia's books into his inventory and gripped one of the swords in the air. He pushed away the various thoughts in his head and sharpened himself, like a blade. He could progress the quest later. That was the appeal of quests. He would have a bunch of them at once, and eventually he'd complete them one by one. There was only one thing of importance right now. He's my senior, so I have to pay my last respects.